بسم اللہ الرحمن الرحیم، اللہم صلی علی محمد وعلی آل محمد وبارک وسلم۔ السلام علیکم۔ نیڈ آف ریلیجن، اچھا جب ہم نیڈ آف ریلیجن کی بات کی تو جب یہ ڈیزائن ہو رہا تھا پلان، تو ہم نے کچھ کوشش کی کہ ہم کچھ ایتھیسٹ یا کوئی لبرلز یا جو لادین لوگ ہیں ان کے ساتھ رابطہ کریں، تاکہ اس میں کوئی ڈبیٹ میں ایک دو طرح کے آپ کے پاس پوائنٹ آف ویوز آ جائیں۔ اچھا، اسلام آباد میں بھی میں نے لوگوں سے رابطہ کیا، میں نے لاہور میں بھی لوگوں سے رابطہ کیا، سم ہاؤ کسی نے بھی حامی نہیں بھری اس ٹاک پہ شامل ہونے کے لیے۔ ان کا خیال یہ تھا، جس کو میں سمرائز کر کے اگر آپ کو بتاؤں، وہ ان کا خیال یہ تھا کہ ان ٹاپکس کی ضرورت نہیں ہے، آپ کو کوئی سائنس اینڈ ٹیکنالوجی یا ڈیولپمنٹ یا پرسنالٹی امپروومنٹ یا ہاؤ ٹو گو فار سائنس ڈیولپمنٹ، ان ٹاپک سے بات کیا کرے۔ جیسے ہی میں نے ایک واٹس ایپ گروپ میں یہ اس کا بروشر شیئر کیا تو نوید تاج غوری صاحب ہیں، میرے دوست ہیں بڑے اچھے، انہوں نے کہا کہ آپ یہ اس ٹاپک کی اب ضرورت نہیں رہی، اب دنیا نا بہت آگے چلی گئی ہے، آپ دیکھیں ویسٹ امریکہ جاپان پہ کن ٹاپک سے بات ہوتی ہے، ان پہ بات کریں۔ اچھا، ایک طبقہ ایسا تھا چونکہ ریلیجس طبقہ ہے، انہوں نے بڑا اپریشیٹ کیا، وہ کہتے ہیں جی یہ تو بڑا اچھا ٹاپک رکھا ہے آپ نے، اس پہ تو جتنی زیادہ بات ہو، آپ کی لائف میں کلیئرٹی آئے، آپ کی کنسیپچل ڈیولپمنٹ ہو، آپ کی لائف میں کسی نہ کسی طریقے سے دین کے بارے میں آسانی آئے، انہوں نے اپریشیٹ کیا۔ اچھا، میں نے دونوں کمنٹس کو میں نے مائنڈ نہیں کیا، اور میں نے دونوں کمنٹس کو بڑی خوش دلی سے قبول کیا، تسلیم کیا، اور دونوں کو بلاک نہیں کیا، کیونکہ اگر ہم لوگوں کو بلاک کرنا شروع کر دیں گے تو ہماری انٹلیکچوئل گروتھ اب نہیں ہو پائے گی۔ ابھی میں فاطمہ کے ساتھ باہر کھڑا ہوا تھا تو یہ کہہ رہی تھی کہ ہم سوال نہیں پوچھتے، ہمارے اندر خوف ہے۔ اچھا، وہ خوف کیوں ہے؟ ہو سکتا ہے وہ آڈیٹوریم میں تو آپ کو کوئی اتنا کوئی روکے گا نہیں، لیکن ایک براٹ اپ ایسا ہے بچپن سے کہ جو ٹیچر ہیں وہ کہتے ہیں کہ مینوں بہتا پتہ ہے، تینوں نہیں پتہ، جو میں کہہ رہا ہوں وہ ٹھیک ہے، وہ سنو۔ حالانکہ میں نے اپنی ارلی ایج میں میں نے تو ٹیچرز کو اور مختلف اسکالرس کو میں نے ہمیشہ سے چیلنج کیا ہے۔ بہرحال جب آپ چیلنج کرتے ہیں چیزوں کو، آپ چیزوں کی ڈیپتھ میں جاتے ہیں، اور ڈیپتھ میں جانے کے ساتھ ساتھ آپ کی جو کنسیپچل کلیئرٹی ہے، جو فلاسفیکل ڈیپتھ ہے، وہ پیدا ہوتی ہے۔ تو میں فہد علی کاظمی صاحب کو میں انوائٹ کرتا ہوں، جو کہ ہمارے آج کے پینل ماڈریٹر ہیں، کہ وہ پلیز اسٹیج پہ آئیں تاکہ ہم اس پینل کا آغاز کریں۔ پلیز ویلکم فہد علی کاظمی صاحب۔ اینڈ آئی ووڈ لائک ٹو انوائٹ مسٹر محمد حجاب who is from Egypt and now living in UK to please come on the stage and start the conversation with our students. Over to you, Fahad Sahab.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Mr. Ali Abbas. Ladies and gentlemen, why do we need religion? In an age of rapid technological advancement, coupled with an ever-increasing secularization, I think the need to present, defend, and perhaps re-articulate the primary thesis of religion is extremely critical, especially for our youth. And that is why we are here. My name is Fahad Ali Kazmi, and we are being joined by an esteemed panel here, and it is my pleasant duty to be introducing our guests. First up, he needs no introduction, literally. He is our first participant and guest, Mr. Muhammad Hijab. Mr. Muhammad Hijab is a philosopher of religion and the co-founder of Sapiens Institute, a very strong voice that has emerged from the West, defending Islam and presenting Islamic viewpoint philosophically, politically, and theologically. You have seen him at various media houses, the way he speaks, the way he defends Islam and religion, and the way he spoke quite lately on Palestinian issue. I think it was a treat to listen to him with the force, with the bravery, with the courage that he speaks. We're absolutely honored and humbled to have you, sir. And today we are going to have a very interesting conversation and discussion on the institution of religion per se. Thanks a lot for your time, and thanks a lot for coming to Institute of Art and Culture, Lahore. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll be joined by, in a bit, Raja Ziaul Haq. You all know Youth Club, and he is the founder and CEO of Youth Club. a well-known motivational speaker, life coach, spiritual cardiologist, as he'd like to introduce himself, and an MWA, Maulvi with an attitude. So Raja Saab will be here, and we'll be discussing about the importance of religion with him also. Panel discussion would be, I'll open the discussion for Mr. Hijab. Mr. Hijab will be articulating and uttering his opening statements for 3 to 5 minutes. And then we will have certain one-to-one questions with Mr. Hijab. And then the floor will be open and the house will be open basically. And you all can chip in and, ask all those important questions. A disclaimer up front, all of us, most of us, me personally, I'm a believing Muslim. I believe in the tradition of Islam and I'm a very proud and a staunch Muslim. Nonetheless, I will be asking those hard questions which are being presented by the other side of the fence. So feel free if you have those questions regarding religion. Despite our very proud identity with Islam, I would appreciate and I would actually encourage all of you to ask those questions because Mr. Hijab is a leading voice internationally and we won't have this opportunity perhaps in near future. So I'll encourage all those questions and I myself might sound at times offensive if I bring those questions. So I wanted to issue that disclaimer up front. Because we are in a Muslim society and we're very proud of that also. But the questions will be asked. So I would want to get the ball rolling. Let me quote Stephen Fry here. And with this statement, I would ask Mr. Hijab to either comment and start the conversation. Mr. Fry says, after thousands of years of supremacy, suppression, and censorship, the champions of religion managed to transform themselves miraculously into victims of cruel verbal abuse, snobbish bullying, and intellectual persecution. And he adds, how offense is taken by religion's guardians whenever their claims and practices are examined in the forensic light of reason, history, and knowledge. So Mr. Fry says that all those claims, all those practices, whenever they're examined in the light of rationality, in the light of empiricism, reason, they don't really stand a chance that they cannot be verified. And now the guardians and the champions of religion, they are crying that, they take a lot of offense when they are examined, so to speak. So on this note, Mr. Hijab, how do you react to this kind of reasoning coming from the other side? Sir.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for having me here in Pakistan. It's a fantastic country. I'll answer directly the comment that was made by Fry. I'm familiar with his works and his output on the media. He's an atheist himself. But you'll find that a lot of the questioning in liberal terms, and when I say liberal here, I'm talking about classical liberalism, not necessarily left-wing ideology, because there is a distinction there, has an assumption of liberal superiority or even liberal neutrality. Now look, liberalism it's an ideology. An ideology, according to Barbara Ross, who wrote this book called Using Political Ideas, is a set of ideas. You could even argue that an ideology like liberalism is a religion, depending on one's definition of religion. Now, the word religion itself is an English word, right? And if you look at some of the dictionary definitions, they do presuppose divination and ritual and all these kind of things. But in reality, some sociologists, even in the Western sphere, people like Charles Taylor and others, consider it to be any system which governs one's life, any transcendental idea, of which feminism and liberalism and communism and the political ideologies would be referred to as a religion in this worldview. But what I mean by this is if I start a conversation with, for example, an atheist or homosexual, or for example, a feminist or whoever it may be, and I ask a question which assumes the supremacy of my own values, that question usually wouldn't be an acceptable question. It would be seen as an awkward or unusual or unintelligent or unreasoned question. For example, if I said in the West where I live, if I went in England in the streets and I saw two lesbians walking together in the streets, and if I went to the lesbians and I said, why are you walking together in this way? If I position myself in this way, this would be considered to be offensive. However, if a white man went to a Muslim woman with a hijab and he asked her exactly the same question, I don't think it would be seen as offensive. I think it would be culturally acceptable. And you got to ask yourself, why is that the case? I think the reason why that is the case is less to do with rationality and reason and more to do with a power hierarchy. That the West is now in charge of the world and therefore the ideas are presupposed as to be the correct ideas. So in the presupposition of his claim is almost a liberal superiority or even a liberal neutrality or a secular neutrality. What we can say about that is that secularism itself is unintelligible without religion. Secularism is defined as the division between church and state. You can't have secularism if you don't have a church or a mosque, because what are you separating? So the point is, if you're starting with secular assumption as a neutral starting point, I have to assume that either you think I'm going to fall for that, or that because you think might is right and West is best, that we're not starting on an equal place. How would we start in an equal place? If I asked the liberal, fine, this is the fair way of doing it. You believe in classical liberalism, you believe in second wave feminism, you believe in communism, you believe in whatever ism you want to believe in. I believe in traditionalist Islam. That's my worldview, that's your worldview. Lakum dinukum waliya din. You have your religion, I have mine. Let's scrutinize evidence on both sides. Let me scrutinize your worldview and your starting point, and you can scrutinize mine. In fact, let me present my evidences for what I believe is to be true, and you present your evidence. And in fact, that's a very Quranic position, because the Quran says, قُلْ هَاتُوا بُرْهَانَكُمْ إِن كُنْتُمْ صَادِقِينَ. Say, bring your evidences if you're truthful. So I think it's a fair starting point with anybody in the world to say, look, here are my evidences for why I believe La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. Why I believe that there's only one God worthy of worship and why Muhammad is indeed the final prophet. You bring your evidence. I have no problem with listening to any feminist in the world produce scientific, philosophical, rational evidence for this claim. If you produce evidence for your claims, I can produce evidence for why I believe God is one and that he's worthy of worship and that Muhammad is a messenger. And we'll see whatever evidence wins. That's a fair starting point. What's not a fair starting point is what he says that religion needs to be scrutinized and we don't need to be. Effectively, he's absolving himself from the criticality of scrutiny which needs to be applied in all cases.
If we present ourselves for scrutiny and just forget them for a minute, what proofs or what rational proofs we are going to present?
Sure. So the way I would position it is the following. We have a system called the GORAB system, which is a very simple system for proving that Islam is the truth. Okay? So the first thing is, and this is acronym, so the G stands for God. The question is, does God exist? This is the first question, because we can't have this conversation unless we establish the existence of God. Now, there are many arguments for God's existence. There's a teleological argument, there's a cosmological argument, the contingency argument, the ontological argument, the fine-tuning argument, a range of different arguments you can read in your own time. I'll just present one for now, which is what you would refer to as the design argument. Now, look, the universe, there's two things which are incontrovertible, two things everybody must agree. That there's the universe, it exists, no doubt about that. And number two, that it allows life to exist within it. Okay? So there is something rather than nothing. That's proposition one. That's something we can call the universe. And proposition two is that it allows life to exist within it. Now, the universe is regular, stable, and uniform to the extent which it allows life to exist. I only have one question to an atheist or anybody else, which is, what's the best explanation for this? Is it intelligence or no intelligence? So if the atheist says, the complication, the sophistication, the uniformity, the regularity, the stability of the universe is better explained from no intelligence rather than intelligence, I would consider them to be insincere in their claim. So that's the first thing. One simple question. What's a better explanation for the fact that the universe exhibits sophistication, complication, regularity, uniformity, and stability to the extent where it allows life to exist? Is it intelligence or no intelligence? The second part is, okay, what proves, you say that there's God and the design argument for God's existence is good enough to prove to me at least that there's an intelligence, no problem. But you say there's one God. So I present an evidence, which the classical Kalam tradition, for why there's one God. And it's a simple argument, just like the first one was extremely simple and it took me 2 minutes to articulate, which is that if there's more than one overall will, more than one all-powerful will, you have three scenarios. Let's imagine for a second there's two gods, like Christians and Hindus believe, effectively the Trinity or something else. If one of those gods wanted to make this bottle turn to the left like this, your right, or this right, which is your left. So one of them, scenario A, is the bottle goes from left to right. Scenario B, God B makes it go from left to right. If the bottle goes left, then God A is the true God and God B is the false God, because he has the power. If it goes to the right, then God B is the true God and God A is the false God, because he has the power. If the bottle stays as it is, then both of them are the false God because both of them don't have the power. Simple as that, which shows you the logical impossibility of there being more than one God. And this is articulated in the most succinct and brief of ways in the Quran, where it says in chapter 23, verse 91, مَا اتَّخَذَ اللَّهُ مِنْ وَلَدٍ وَمَا كَانَ مَعَهُ مِنْ إِلَهٍ إِذًا لَذَهَبَ كُلُّ إِلَهٍ بِمَا خَلَقَ وَلَعَلَى بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ. That God doesn't have a son, nor did he have any creators with him. If that was the case, they would have tried to take what they have created and outstripped one another in the creation. So in other words, you can't have more than one all-powerful agency, or more than one all-powerful entity. So we've said G, which is God. Maybe I can quiz you on this, but G is for God. What did we say? The design argument. It's either from what or what? Intelligence or no intelligence. You're with me, right? Then we spoke about the oneness of God, and we spoke about Dalil al-Tamana, which is the idea that there cannot be more than one all-powerful agency. Now, as for the Quran, how do you prove that the Quran is the word of God? Now, we have a lot of output on this, but I'll just give you a taster, and obviously any questions can be asked. For me, I divide the matter into necessary and sufficient conditions. Okay? So, for instance, in Islamic marriage, it's necessary condition that there's a man and a woman. Now, of course, the LGBT community will say, well, what about us? We'll say, listen, we're talking about Islamic marriage for now, right? There has to be a man and there has to be a woman. That's a necessary condition for an Islamic marriage to be operationalized. It's not a sufficient condition, though. So if you have a man and a woman, it's not enough that you've got a man and a woman, that's it, the marriage is done. You need to now have the two witnesses, you need to have now the mahar, and so on. So that's an example of what a sufficient condition is. So now that we know what the terms mean, what does the word necessary condition mean? What does the word sufficient condition mean? How do we apply that to Quran? A necessary condition for a book to be from God is that it must not contain therein contradictions. Simple as that, because a contradiction is a testament that something is false. Now, the Quran is the only ancient religious book which even challenges humankind to find a contradiction in it. If it was from other than God, it says, لَوَجَدُوا فِيهِ اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. They would have found in it many contradictions, chapter 4, verse 92. So, if you look at the Bible and other texts, and obviously we can speak about that, there's contradictions on the first page. I mean, if you look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, it says God created the day and the night. But on the fourth day, he created the sun. But how can you have the day and the night without the sun? In Genesis chapter 2, verse 5, the second page, it says no plant had sprung up yet. But in the fourth day, on the third day, in fact, in Genesis 1, God created all the shrubbery and the vegetation. So is there plants or no plants? There's a contradiction. And how can you have vegetation anyway without the sun? I mean, there's lots of contradictions here going on. Scientific, internal, external. I mean, there's so much. And it's the first page of the Bible. So what I'm saying is that we're looking at the Bible, the Quran, all the texts, and we're seeing that, in fact, the Bible is disqualified, the Bhagavad Gita is disqualified, all these books are disqualified. So we said number one is that for a necessary condition, the book must not contain contradictions. Number two, it must be preserved. And as we know, according to biblical scholarship itself, Bruce Metzger and others, the Bible has been corrupted, the Quran has not. That's another discussion for another day. These are necessary conditions. What about sufficient conditions? There are predictions. Now, you guys watch cricket. It's a cricket nation. If I were to say, look, India is going to play Pakistan in cricket, and Pakistan is going to beat India 5, whatever, I don't know how this works, yeah, 51, whatever number, and I'll give you a number. And exactly, in fact, before that, and I say, I'm being inspired by God. God is telling me all of this stuff. God is telling me that Pakistan is going to beat India with this scoreline. And let's say the opposite happens, that India beats Pakistan. This will completely ruin my credibility as a claimant of prophethood. But the Quran, it makes predictions about the future. For example, in chapter 30, verses 1 to 5, غُلِبَتِ الرُّومُ فِي أَدْنَى الْأَرْضِ وَهُمْ مِنْ بَعْدِ غَلَبِهِمْ سَيَغْلِبُونَ لِلَّهِ الْأَمْرُ مِنْ قَبْلُ وَمِنْ بَعْدُ يَوْمَئِذٍ يَفْرَحُ الْمُؤْمِنُونَ. That the Romans had been defeated in a nearby lowland, and that they would come back and defeat their Persians in 3 to 9 years. Very specific and very confident predictions of the future. And in fact, وَعْدَ اللَّهِ لَا يُخْلِفَ اللَّهُ وَعْدَهُ. That this is the promise of God. And exactly 8 years later, according to non-Islamic sources, and there's a book that I recommend called The Forbidden Prophecies that you can get online for free, written by my friend called Abu Zakaria, which gives you all the references for this. Exactly 8 years later, what the Quran said is going to happen did in fact happen. Now that's just one example. I can effectively give you 50 examples with the same precision and the same frequency. Now, at what point do you say, okay, this is proof of the fact that this is a true prophet and this is a true religion? Now, I've given you 3 things here. G-O-R. G is for God. O is for oneness. R is for revelation. The whole acronym is GORAB. We would say about the prophet that his life itself was not the life of somebody who was interested in taking money or this or that, because he was offered all those things. He was offered money and prestige and women, and he rejected all of it. And in fact, he put himself in a dangerous position for 13 years where he and his people were boycotted and punished and persecuted to the point where they had to migrate multiple times, that he was a fugitive and they were trying to kill him and all these kinds of things. And then when he went to Medina, he was himself fighting on the battlefield. I consider this all to be a testament to the character of the Prophet Muhammad, that he was a truthful man, that he was a sincere man, that his actions and behaviors were not the behaviors and actions of a deceiver, of a liar, of a pathological liar. In fact, that there were actions and the behaviors of somebody who was sincere in his call. So this is how I would present it to somebody who didn't believe. Now, one more thing is that I don't think that on the other side, if I were to say, please, as a liberal or as an atheist or as whatever, please provide your evidence that your worldview is true. I don't think they'll be able to provide, even in this 7 minutes that I've been speaking, anything close to what I've been providing. And obviously, each of those things that I've said, compendious and voluminous works could be written about each of those. And they have been.
Very comprehensive.
Thank you.
Raja Sahab just joined us also. And I'm doing this slightly thankless job of, questioning. So Raja Sahab, picking cue from Hijab, as he was rightly pointing out, and he was sharing proofs, and he was talking about assertions in Quran and how they were true in due course of time. But I have to remind the audience also that we are just not talking about Islam per se, the greater concept of religion also. So my question to you is that especially in the revealed traditions, we talk about Adam and Eve, right? But the modern science is talking about evolution. And for a student like for a student like myself, there seems to be a huge contradiction. Darwin and his sort of exploration, they talk about the entire cycle of evolution. And we Homo sapiens have ancestors, not in human beings, but somewhere else. While we as believing, people related to any religion, we talk about Adam and Eve. So there seems to be a contradiction when it comes to the scientific fact, and apparently they had some verifications, empirical knowledge, so on and so forth. So how would you sort of address this contradiction? And just for the benefit...
Is that me or Roger?
That's him, and then I'll get back to you also. And since, there is no, perhaps Christian is not here, but I would want to defend here also that some Bible scholars are also of the view that the language of Bible is metaphorical. So cannot be treated as something literal. And that is why we have to, and there is this principle of accommodation that all these biblical scholars talk about. So even if when you quote first para of Genesis, you have to have that principle of accommodation. That's the worldview of biblical scholars. So that's another debate.
Is that something you want to respond to? Or?
No, you can respond afterwards.
Yeah.
But evolution,
Okay.
Raza Saab.
Okay, Jazakallah khair. First of all, are we speaking just in English or can we switch to Urdu as well?
We'll restrict for the benefit of
Okay,
the audience and
fantastic.
Mr.
No
Hijab,
problem, no problem,
we'll restrict
inshallah.
ourselves to English.
Okay, so Bismillah. So I think the fundamental question that we need to address here is that are we interpreting the Quran based upon scientific knowledge that we have, or are we doing it the other way around? So first of all, a person who might say that, because something has been established by science, this is now the truth with a capital T, and now all scripture, all revealed knowledge, all religions now have to somehow try to conform to whatever we know from a scientific perspective. First of all, in order to understand that, you need to understand the philosophy of science itself. So the question might be, is science the only way to truth? So what we basically call scientism is that a person who thinks that science is the only way to actually reach absolute truth with a capital T. And we know from a subject known as epistemology, which means how are you going to source your knowledge from? Where do you get your knowledge from? So science is a way to truth, you can say that. Science is a very good tool in order to get to inductive reasoning. But then we have other tools as well from which we gain knowledge. So let me give you an example. For example, there's something called logic or deductive reasoning. What is the scope of science and what is the scope of deductive reasoning? So for example, what does science tell us? It is something that you see from your five senses in front of you. It has to happen in front of you. So for example, if I take salt and I mix it in water, which is H2O, I get a compound which is of a salty taste and it looks a bit murky. So this is something that you can do, and you do it every single time you do it, it gives you this exact same result. I take something, I throw it up in the air, it comes back down every single time. I actually call it the force of gravity, and we know that exists, and every single time it gives you the same thing, and you can take out the value as 9.8 meter per second square. So this is what you have. So for example, science can also be that you have a specific thing happening, and out of that you take a generalization. For example, if I have a small wallet, and in that wallet there are some coins, and I take out one coin, and it's say a 5 rupee coin. I take out another one, and it's also a 5 rupee coin. I take out a third one, it's also a 5 rupee coin. And there are a total of 50 coins in there. So I can, from an inductive reasoning perspective, a scientific perspective, I can deduce that therefore all coins in this wallet are 5 rupee coins. Now, is that statement true or false? It could be true. I mean, if I take out all the coins, maybe they're all 5 rupee coins. Or if I take out the next one, maybe it's a 10 rupee coin. So remember that science is always based upon a probabilistic framework. What do I mean by that? What is a probabilistic framework? It means that science is only concerned with a particular sample set. If you increase the sample set, the results might change. So for example, just as a reference, Newton's physics is very different from Einstein's physics. So Newton, based upon came up with certain conclusions, and when Einstein came on the scene, he actually challenged those, and he said, no, there is something called relativity. So he came up with something else. We can also understand it through something called the black swan problem. So imagine if you go to a lake, for example, and you observe the swans that are coming to that lake. And before that, there has been no research done on swans. And you observe them for about a week, and you observe, let's say, 1,000 swans in 1 week. And all of those swans are white swans. So from a scientific perspective, you have observed something that in a week's time, you observed 1,000 swans, and all of them were white. So you therefore inductively conclude that all swans in this world are white swans. And keep in mind that no other studies have been done on swans anywhere on the planet. So are you right in your assessment or are you wrong? You could be right. It could be right that yes, in fact, all swans on the planet are white swans. Because if you expand the sample, you might still get that result. Or whenever the first black swan is discovered, your current understanding becomes false. So you will now say that no, actually swans are white and there are certain swans that are black also. And if you expand the sample a bit more, maybe you go to Africa, maybe you go to South America, you find no, there are a certain amount of brown swans as well. So the thing is,
theories, then, unless they are falsified, they are to be treated as, laws cast in stone, right?
Okay, so,
unless they are falsified.
Okay, so here's the thing. They're never going to be cast in stone. Science is always going to be based on a probabilistic framework. There's always a probability that this thing could be wrong. And there's always that. So you never say it's an absolute fact that this thing is the way it is, because we haven't really expanded our knowledge base. That's number one. Number two is there's something called logic, and logic is different from science. Oftentimes people will interchangeably say, this is scientifically and logically true. And the thing is, logic is something entirely different. Logic is, for example, I love riding motorcycles. If I go outside in my front yard and I see my bike parked there, and there's some water on it, I look around and I see there's some water on the floor. I go outside, open my gate, and I see there's some water on the street as well. And I logically deduce that perhaps there was rainfall. And enough rainfall to get my bike slightly wet, but not enough to completely have it soaked, or the garden being soaked, or the floor. So the thing is that there are many things that happen on a deductive things, and we use this all the time. We use deductive reasoning all the time, and we do achieve a certain level of truth in that as well. So for example, what do detectives do? Detectives, their entire job is to actually look at a crime scene, not that they actually saw it while it was happening, because science is empirical evidence that has to happen in front of your eyes. Like for example, you take salt, you mix it with water, you get salt water. But deductive reasoning is something entirely different that's based upon logic. So for example, if you're walking in the sand and you see the footprints of a camel, you have not seen the camel with your own eyes, you have not touched the camel, you have not smelt the camel, you have not tasted the camel, but you know for a fact that a camel walked through here. And it could be true that a camel did walk, because these are the footprints of a camel, not the footprints of a donkey or a dog or an elephant. But it could but again, there's also some probabilistic framework there as well, because it could be that somebody's trying to prank you and they had some sticks on which they had the footprints of a camel and they did that. So even deduction can have a little bit of probability that it could go wrong. Similarly, there's another way to truth, and that you can say is something that we call testimony. If I ask the question, for example, that how many of you are convinced beyond shadow of doubt that your mother is in fact your real mother? How many of you are convinced beyond shadow of doubt? Now, if I ask you, how are you convinced that your mother is your real mother, what would you say? Because the testimony of your father, probably. Because even if you go and get a DNA test done, that also DNA test will be done by someone, and he will be handing you a report, and that report could be fake as well. And I'm sure none of you have actually gotten a DNA test done in the first place. But still you believe from the core of your heart that your mother is your mother, because there are testimonies of the mother-in-law, obviously, and that's a big testimony. There's a testimony of your pupo and your khala and your chacha and your mamu. All of these, maybe there are 20 different testimonies of your mother being your mother. So the thing is, we believe certain things, and likewise you can say that for a lot of things, entire history, for example, is all testimony. How do we know that Genghis Khan existed? Was anybody there to see him fighting and conquering and doing these things? How do we know about Alexander the Great? How do we know that China really exists? I'm assuming nobody's been to China, amongst us at least. So how do we know? Because we've read it somewhere, or we've seen it on Google Maps. All of these are testimonies. And even science cannot progress unless you have testimony, because if you were to make it a prerequisite that every time you have to do something new in science, you have to do everything that was done before all over again, otherwise you're just taking testimony. So the thing is, another way to truth is testimony. Then you have ethical and moral truths. Like, how do you know that murder is wrong? How do you know that? Because from a scientific perspective, I could argue that killing some people could be actually right as well. Like, for example, if I was to say to you, what is so wrong about killing, let's say, 500 villagers who are really no good for the country, just shooting them? I mean, what's the problem in that? And any person would say, but that's just plainly wrong. But then I might argue from a scientific perspective that what is in fact happening is a type of population control. And these people were no good anyway, and so why don't we do just that? So again, ethical, moral truths, we all know them to be true. We all know from the core of our hearts. And then there's something called the fitra, or what we call argument from intuition. So we have that. And then we have why questions, because science doesn't answer those. So there's a list of areas from an epistemological perspective that make us know that science is not the only way of getting to the truth. Now, after this whole long tamheed or shabil, let me come to the question itself, which is evolution. Now, the question would be, what do we actually know about evolution? What are the quote-unquote facts on ground to show us that this is what's happening?
So how can I include hijab on this also?
Yes, please. So I would happily pass this on to inshallah, to answer this and the other part of the question which was asked earlier. The only thing I'm going to leave you with, inshallah, is that you have to question what do we know, because even from a evolutionary biological perspective, there is still huge ikhtilaf. It is made to show us, they make it seem as if this is the only explanation we have. As a matter of fact, academics in the field themselves will heavily debate it. But it's somehow, due to some, political agendas or something, it is pushed that way. A good documentary to watch in that is called, Unintelligent Design, I think it's called, or something along those lines. It's a very good documentary that actually debunks the whole idea that Darwinian evolution is the only version of a scientific explanation of what the process of human beings on earth has been. So over to Brother Hijab.
Brother Hijab is ready to go, I can see that. So without any further ado, please.
Well, I mean, if an atheist came and said to me, well, the reason why your religion is false is because of Darwinian evolution, my first response to them would be, how does Darwinian evolution actually prove atheism is true? Because there's no necessary link between atheism and Darwinian evolution.
But at the end of the day, it is actually sort of contradicting my claim as a religious person that I was from Adam and Eve. So instead of going to their ground, I have to secure my ground first.
Sure, but let's take this step by step, because the first thing is that we have to agree that it doesn't do anything for the case of atheism. Because atheism, as defined by Graham Oppy, who is seen as one of the foremost, authorities on atheism in the philosophy of religion, he defines it as believing that there is no God, right? So they would have to explain first and foremost why a Darwinian mechanism or the theory of evolution or anything like that actually bolsters that claim in any way, shape or form. In fact, Richard Dawkins himself, to be fair to them, actually agrees with this point. He says that, exactly what you just said, it's not that I say that evolution, it's a case for atheism, but it's just that most religious people don't believe in it, and therefore it's a case against their religion. So that's the first thing that needs to be pointed out, that it's not actually a case for atheism. The second thing is, I would say, look, what of the Darwinian theory of evolution are Muslims told not to believe in? Which part of it in particular? If you think of the amount of species that are on the earth, we're talking about maybe 10,000 species or something like that, and billions and trillions of animals. Okay, fine. What is it that Islam itself tells you not to believe in? What does it become blasphemy if you believe in? It's only one aspect, which is the creation of Adam. Now, strictly speaking, does Darwinian evolution discount the existence of a man called Adam and a woman called Hawa or Eve or anything? It doesn't discount that. What it does is it says that this is the tree of life. This is exactly how human beings, something called abiogenesis, from the beginning of when chemistry became biology all the way until the end. This is how evolution worked. We're saying there's two aspects of this which are problematic for us. 99% of this is not a problem for us, in fact. And it's not even fair to say, well, religious people don't believe in Darwinian mechanism or can't believe in the Darwinian mechanism, or even that religious people cannot believe in speciation, adaptation, or the transformation of an animal from one to another. Because there's no verse in the Quran that says an animal cannot transform from one animal to another. There's no such verse. So what we're talking about, two things in particular. The first of which is highly speculative, according to their own, which is abiogenesis, the beginning. From when they say the first cell replicated itself, when chemistry effectively became biology. What is chemistry? It's the study of matter. What is biology? It's the study of living matter. The only difference between chemistry and biology is life. So the question is, how did non-living stuff become living stuff? So they have these theories, all kinds of things, panspermia, this one, that one. They believe in these things that some of them say something came outside the earth, it was extraterrestrial. They have all these kinds of theories. It's completely speculative, and it's not empirical in the least. But it had to have happened. In fact, we don't see it happening now. We don't see chemistry becoming biology in that sense. Which ironically, by the way, if you look at most classical definitions of what a miracle is, a miracle, like David Hume, the atheist, his classical definition of what a miracle is something which goes against the laws of nature. So effectively, this idea of abiogenesis is a miraculous event, according to the scientific definition, or the philosophical definition of miracle. Because it's inexplicable, it's not happening now. We have not observed this happen. So that's the first thing. The second part now is with Adam, alayhi salam. We would say the following. We would say, this part of it is the slither of the theory of Darwinian evolution, or Neo-Lamarckian evolution, or evolution by genetic engineering, or any kind of evolution, because it's not just one evolution, which we would have to say, actually, we believe that human being, because of his distinguished characteristics, God created human being directly. And there are things which indicate the distinguished features of the human being. For example, Raja mentioned some of them, the propensity and the ability and the capability of the human being to ask why, the Popperian ultimate questions, the ability of human beings to create civilizations, to leave things behind, to speak in a communicative language. These are things which are very specific to the human being, to subjugate all other life forms. Greatest theorists of our time, how is it that language developed in the way it did? We have a theory of that. But if it relates to evolution in general, it's not correct to even say that, okay, well, as a religious Muslim, you are not allowed to believe in any theory of evolution. We can believe in speciation, adaptation, we can even believe in transformation. There's nothing really that the Quran that sticks out and says you can't, except for the aspect of the creation of Adam, and also the creation of life itself was, we would say, an event that was inspired by God. And these are unfalsifiable. And Allah says that in Quran, He says, مَا أَشْهَدْتُهُمْ خَلْقَ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَلَا خَلْقَ أَنفُسِهِمْ. We have not let them see the creation of the heavens and the earth, nor the creation of themselves. It's not something we actually saw. So you cannot employ an empirical method to this. This has to be, as he mentioned, inference to the best explanation. Because you have different things. You have, in epistemology, as he mentioned, you've got inference, which is abductive, it's called abductive reasoning. You have, deductive reasoning, which is usually informed by some kind of induction anyway, in one of the premises. You have induction, which he's mentioned the problems of, etc. So you'd have to do, in order for you to say this is what happened, inference to the best explanation, which is not even induction, by the way. It involves induction, but it's inference to the best explanation. And I like what David Belinsky said. Me personally, if someone says, what about you? What do you think of Darwinian theory? I find it incredulous, to say the least. David Belinsky had a response. He's an atheist himself, but he had a response to Richard Dawkins on these issues. And I gave this example before, and I'll give it again. He was giving the example of a whale transforming into a cow. Okay? Because effectively, that's what they believe. The whale and the cow are in the same family, right? And he was making the point that how many transformations need to happen for a whale-like creature to transform into a cow-like creature? And he found it incredulous. Now, I think it takes a lot of faith to believe in a story like that. Frankly, we haven't seen anything like that. I haven't gone and put that under a microscope. It takes a lot of faith to believe in something like that. But as a Muslim, there's nothing really to stop anyone from believing that if they really believed in it.
But you would nonetheless concede that it is a blind spot for a religious believer, nonetheless, to be able to reconcile between evolution and religious belief? As
I mentioned, when we talk about evolution, and if we're talking about the entirety of biology and all species and life forms, we're not talking about 99.9 recurring. We're talking about 0.01 recurring. So we're talking about it's even unfair to say that. We can say we can believe in the theory of evolution except for 0.01% of it. effectively there's no issue there.
There is no issue as
You see?
such. We'll want to include our students, and students can come on the stage and they'll ask a question. Anyone? And as our students also sort of come and ask you questions, I have a very basic question. Most societies which are secular, not religious, at the level of the world, they are progressing leaps and bounds. Their values are better, their systems are better, and the so-called religious societies, they are unable to, sort of match them vis-a-vis prosperity, vis-a-vis well-being. So if religion was, such a basic and such a fundamental institution, why religious societies have not been able to prosper the way these non-religious societies are sort of exhibiting prosperity?
I think if you look at the matter, once again, historically and contemporaneously, right? I don't think that's necessarily the truth. I think that, in fact, if we looked at correlative things, we could even make the opposite case, that when you had countries like Pakistan that were governed directly by Islam, they were more prosperous than they are now. And now they're trying to copy the secular. They're more of a failure than they ever were. Because, for example, the subcontinent was governed by various Muslim empires. It was much stronger in terms of the military prowess. If you look at, for example, the Ottomans, they had a bureaucracy which was extremely functional. Compare it with its European counterpart at the time. If you look, for example, about the Abbasids, where the golden age of Islam took place, once again, compare them with their European counterpart. The Mali Empire is a black empire in Mali. Mansa Musa, compare him with his European counterpart on a monetary level. That's a historical analysis. Now we don't have effectively what you're referring to as non-secular societies. These are amalgams of secular and non-secular. In many ways, America itself is an amalgam because a pure secularism is undemocratic and actually not operational. For example, in America, when someone makes a law about gay rights or about abortion, and they do referendums on that, and they're inspired by Christianity to vote for or against, they are, in effect, contravening the secular principle by doing that. So, for example, someone in, Alabama, who's got to vote for or against gay marriage. If he votes for gay marriage, or against gay marriage, let's say against gay marriage, and then they pass a law that in the state of Alabama, gay marriage is not allowed. Secularism is contravened here. But that's allowed because democracy is upheld, in a way. So you have these Western ideologies that actually contradict each other when you put them together.
But despite the contradictions, they are still, in post-enlightenment period. They are ahead of us. Let's, concede.
Let's not concede, because now let's go to today's world, right? Are we talking about populations, or are we talking about religions, or are we
We are talking about, the human well-being.
Sure, fine. In that case, let me quote some studies then, because that's the only way to do it.
I live in Pakistan. There are 57 other Muslim states. Barring the Middle East, I think most Muslim, the overwhelming majority of Muslims or religious individuals, they are lagging behind big time when it comes to human well-being.
When I discussed this matter with Jordan Peterson, this was his central gripe, right? And let me completely dismiss it. And to be honest with you, I've had correspondence with him, and at the end of it, he agreed. You just use a key word, which is well-being. Now, they have something called the happy index in economics. Now, this is a misleading index because what it does is it puts together something called the human development index and the GDP per capita and GDP and then, life expectancy. And it makes an amalgam on aggregate of, and then it says these are the most happy countries, and they put the Scandinavian countries at the top of the world. But is this an index of how happy and how satisfied people are in their life? No, it's not. So what are the studies that have been done on this issue? There's one that's been done in 2019, no less, by Pew Research. And that study conclusively showed, or at least showed in general, that religious people have a more satisfying life than non-religious people. So we'll say, okay, well, that's one thing. What about Muslims? There was a study that was done in 2020, researchers in Mannheim University in Germany. And the name of the study is The Impact of Oneness Beliefs on Life Satisfaction. That's effectively the name of the study. It's a 13-page document. I paid $30 to buy it myself. It's not free of charge. You can't get it free of charge. But nevertheless, you can see the following. I'll give you the free summary of it right now. Effectively, they said that Muslims have the best satisfaction. They looked at all the groups and they said Muslims have the best satisfaction. So in other words, and what did they say? They said they looked at the degree of empathy, the degree of social cohesion, and the few markers, and they said that of all those groups, Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, whatever, Muslims were number one.
You're implying that despite the lack of amenities and facilities, they are happier of the Lord. And despite the low GDP per capita.
Sure. So what I'm saying is there is a difference between saying someone has got more money and someone is more satisfied. Because the evidence is that actually those who have more money are not those secularists living in Scandinavia that have more money. There's no evidence to suggest they're happier or more life satisfied than Muslims living in Pakistan. I just literally, before I came here in Pakistan, I was in Norway, like literally one day before, and it was minus 10 degrees, okay? I had to wear multiple jackets and stuff. I actually feared my hands were gonna fall off. Yeah, or I'm gonna get frostbite or something like that. And I jumped into the lake and this and that because I wanted to try what these guys were doing. Because they jump into the cold water and they have these kind of things. Anyway, we've done multiple social experiments which are on my channel. And we asked them how they feel. And everybody I asked had problems with depression. Every single person I asked.
On that, I would want to include, sorry for the interjection, I would want to include our students also. So Mr. Hijab is really, saying that qualitatively Muslims and, they are better off even when monetarily they are not doing that well. So,
and by the way, monetarily, it depends on what region. Like, for example, GDP per capita, Qatar has a higher GDP per capita than most of the countries. UAE has more GDP per capita than Brunei. Like, if you look at now, if you go worldometer.com or one of those economic websites, you'll see 4 of the top 10 GDP per capita countries are Muslim countries, which is not that bad, to be honest, even from that angle.
But, yeah. Yes, introduce yourself and then we have students. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum. I am a student of film here and I am in 6th semester. My name is Abdul Monim. First of all, I have a request that can we break the language barrier? People can ask questions in Urdu for.
आप उर्दू में पूछ सकते हैं, मैं फिर इंग्लिश में ट्रांसलेट कर दूंगा इनके लिए. प्लीज पूछें आप.
सर मेरा आपसे क्वेश्चन है कि आपने डिडक्टिव रीजनिंग की बात की थी, उसमें जैसे कि 2 साल पहले अगर मैं अपना बताऊं, मैं मौसमी मुसलमान था और इट वाज वेरी हार्ड फॉर मी टू रैप माई हेड अराउंड सेक्ट्स और ये फ़िरके जो हैं. और ज़ाहिर सी बात है हमें शुरू से ही अपनी एजुकेशन सिस्टम से डिडक्टिव रीजनिंग पे ही बताया गया है और हमें क्रिटिकल थिंकिंग पे नहीं सिखाया गया. बेसिकली व्हाट वी शुड डू इज़ क्रिटिकल थिंकिंग. आप क्या सजेस्ट करते हैं कि हाउ टू फाइंड अ वे आउट ऑफ डूइंग डिडक्टिव रीजनिंग और हाउ टू बी ए क्रिटिकल थिंकर? और दूसरा मेरा मोहम्मद हिजाब सर से ये एक सवाल है कि फर्स्ट ऑफ ऑल आई वांट टू थैंक मोहम्मद हिजाब फॉर रिप्रेजेंटिंग इस्लाम अगेंस्ट द Gaza conflict.
Allah bless Brother Hijab for the bravery and courage that he displays on these international media houses. We're grateful, sir.
And my question is, how are we supposed to help?
I'll take the first. The first question was regarding how to inculcate critical thinking. I think what needs to happen is that we need to question things for what they are and not just take anything at face value. So you have to ask the question why. And so anything that happens, anything that's occurring, for example, and my own personal journey coming towards the deen and trying to understand religion has been a journey where all of these tools which I just mentioned earlier, inductive, deductive, going on your fitra, your gut feel, looking at ethical moral truths, all of these things come into play because you are a human being and you are made up of all of these things. It's not just that we have a particular mindset where we're only empirical all the time. It can't work that way because a lot of things in life, as I said, you're taking from different sources. So what I would say is that learn to question things, and then once you come to a conclusion, have the courage and have enough strength in your heart in order to accept it. So for example, the Prophet ﷺ, he said that, what is the sign of an arrogant person? When he was asked the question, he said that, the one with even an atom's weight worth of arrogance is not going to enter paradise. And when asked, what is this arrogance that, sometimes we like to wear good clothes, sometimes we like to wear good shoes. Is that what arrogance is? And he said, no, it's not that. It's that when truth is presented to you, you refuse to accept it. And to look down upon others. Wearing nice clothes is not a problem, but looking down on others, that's a problem. So I think we have to be open-minded enough that once we realize that something is the truth, something that we can testify to, then inshallah we should accept it. And believe me, because I've been through this, I'm pretty sure, but the hijab has also gone through a similar kind of cycle. Alhamdulillah, my journey revolves around me doing critical thinking, going to a different, things, analyzing, evaluating, looking, and finally coming to where I am right now. So I would encourage and advise that inshallah take that route, and inshallah, because Islam is the truth, we have nothing to hide, we're very transparent, it's very open, and we have enough, as Brother Hijab said, to defend our faith and to present a very solid case for our worldview. So inshallah that will help, and I think I'll ask Brother Hijab to take the next question, which was regarding what we can do for the people of
Gaza. The gentleman was also asking what can we do for the people in Gaza?
Yeah, that's what I'm asking.
Respond to that quickly.
Well, I think being in Pakistan, which I consider to be the strongest Muslim country militarily in the world today, there's a lot we can do to try and influence the politics. And I think whatever way you know how to do that, you should. And especially when a country like Pakistan does things like protesting and boycotting and these kind of things, people really do pay attention. So I would say continue with all those good things, inshallah.
Thank you. Yes.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. My name is Raja Umairul Haq. It's been a long time. I was willing and hoping to meet Sir Raja Ziaul Haq Sahab. And I am in charge of Life and Living Department at Rifa International University. Sir, I'm working under Mughira Luqman Sahab. And I'm really pleased to see Muhammad Hijab. I've watched a lot of his debates with Mark Ward and other people, and really appreciate and feeling blessed today to meet you guys today and to see you. And my question is that a lot of our youth is convinced about Islam. It's not that everyone is confused regarding atheism or anything, existence of God. But the challenge is that the people are finding it hard to get back to the track. Once they fall into things like prohibited things in their lives, they want to come back, but they need to have some tips, some to-do list to achieve the life of sunnah, the life of consciousness. So what do you suggest to a person who wants to revert to the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And how can we? I was actually observing that while the 60 countries, the Muslim countries, are not responding the way they should have, because we lack the strength of Iman. How can our youth get back to that? This is my question. Thank you.
Jazakallah khair. Alhamdulillah, I think we have dedicated our lives now to doing the same thing which you actually mentioned for the youth. And what I say to youngsters is that, because Brother Muhammad Hijab probably deals a lot with non-Muslims, but our interaction is primarily with people in Pakistan, people who are predominantly Muslims, and yes, they have lost their way somewhere. And I was one of them. I was one of them. I was someone that, was living a very different lifestyle to what I have now. I went to the UK for my bachelor's degree. Then I went to Australia for my master's degree. And all of this was in secular subjects. Until I realized that my life is so much involved in sin that, there comes a time where you begin to hate yourself. And why is it that way? Because, again, if you want to analyze it or go deeper into it, there's a very interesting book by Dostoevsky called Crime and Punishment. And the entire thesis of that book is that crime itself is punishment. When you do something wrong, there's something called guilt in your heart which you have to live with. You have to live with the guilt of that crime. And living with the guilt of that crime means every single day looking at yourself in the mirror and seeing what you have become. This is not how you were, but this is what you have become. And that eats away literally at your soul. So I know, for example, in my family, somebody who is a direct relative, they committed suicide at the age of 40. Someone who was extremely rich, extremely wealthy, could afford anything that life has to offer, but yet in severe forms of depression. My best friend at the age of 18 also killed himself. someone whose lifestyle was very similar to my own. And for the life of me, I couldn't understand why people with such affluent lifestyles are killing themselves. Until when I went to Australia, my degree was in information technology, but I took a psychology course. And in that, we had a project called the Suicide Intervention Project. And the reason why I participated in that project was not for learning what happens, but actually to protect my own self from going down that path, because at that moment I was feeling as if my life is completely useless. I have become a very shallow image of what I was supposed to be, and all of these things. And so the guilt eats away at you. So one thing that I want to tell believing brothers and sisters who might have gone a bit on the left or right, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran, قُلْ يَا عِبَادِيَ الَّذِينَ أَسْرَفُوا عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ لَا تَقْنَطُوا مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَغْفِرُ الذُّنُوبَ جَمِيعًا. That, O my slaves who have wronged themselves by committing sins, do not despair of the mercy of Allah, because indeed Allah can forgive all sins. All sins? Yes, all sins. I mean, all sins. No matter what you have done, Allah is willing to forgive you. If you are willing to repent, Allah is willing to forgive. As a matter of fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even says that إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ التَّوَّابِينَ وَيُحِبُّ الْمُتَطَهِّرِينَ. Indeed, Allah loves those who repent. Allah loves the sinner who repents. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said that every son of Adam is a sinner. Every son of Adam is a sinner, but the best of them are those who repent. So we all sin. Who doesn't sin? Some people have big sins, some have small sins. Some will sin privately, some will sin publicly. Some sin accidentally, and some sin very deliberately. But we all sin. Remember that if you are willing to repent, Allah is willing to forgive. As a matter of fact, there is a hadith Qudsi where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that even if you fill the heavens and the earth with sins, Allah can give you a forgiveness greater than that. If you were to fill the oceans with your sins, Allah can forgive you greater than that. So remember that there is always a way to go back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah is willing to forgive you. Allah is willing to love you. Inna Allaha yuhibbu tawabin. Allah is willing to become your friend. Allahu waliyul lazina amanu yukhrijuhum min az-zulumati ila an-nur. Allah is the friend of those who believe. Because when you sin, the Prophet ﷺ says, your iman goes away like this. So when you repent, the iman comes back. So Allah is the friend. You will become Allah's friend later. Allah becomes your friend first. Allahu waliyul lazina amanu yukhrijuhum min az-zulumati ila nur. Allah takes them out of the darknesses, out of the sinful life, out of the depression, out of the anxiety, and takes them to that one straight path, ila nur, in that one path of light. So Allah is willing to do all of that, and Allah is even willing to change all of your bad deeds into good deeds. So Allah is willing to forgive you, Allah is willing to become your friend, Allah is willing to love you, Allah is even willing to turn your bad deeds into good deeds. The only question remains, are you willing to repent or not? If you can do it, believe me, it's done. I will conclude with a small anecdote. My own teacher, Dr. Fahad Ali, he's in Islamabad, he's a big alim of the deen, and he's a lovely man, he's a wonderful man. He's one of the best people, I would say, right now on the planet. I mean, this is my assessment of him. A person came to him and he said, Sheikh Saab, Maulana Saab, I have a question. He said, what's the question? He said, how will I know that Allah has forgiven me? Good question, right? He said, how will I know that Allah has forgiven me? What is the sign that I know that Allah has forgiven me? And the Sheikh Saab unexpectedly became angry. And I thought, this is not a question to get angry. If he would have asked me, I would have given him maybe some signs. But Sheikh Saab handled it in a very different way. And he said, do you not believe in Allah? And he said, Sheikh Saab, I believe in Allah. That's why I'm repenting. And that's why I'm asking him, what is the sign that I know that He's forgiven me? He said, do you not believe in Allah? He said, I believe in Allah. He said, do you not believe in the word of Allah? He said, I believe in the word of Allah. He said, now when Allah has said in the Quran, قُلْ يَا عِبَادِيَ الَّذِينَ أَسْرَفُوا عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ لَا تَقْنَطُوا مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَغْفِرُ الذُّنُوبَ جَمِيعًا, that Allah forgives all sins. After this, Allah is saying, I forgive all sins. Now what sign are you looking for? After the Quran has been revealed and Allah is telling you Himself, He will forgive you no matter how big the sin. What type of sign are you looking for? Are you waiting for Jibreel to come down and give you a certificate that Allah has forgiven you? Are you willing for the ocean to part ways and show you something coming out of that saying that yes, so-and-so, son of so-and-so or daughter of so-and-so, you have been forgiven by Allah? What sign are you looking for after the sign has come already to you? Allahu Akbar, that was a very powerful thing. And now if anybody asks me this question, I give them the same reply. So I hope that helps to understand that you can turn back. Don't ever think like I thought to myself at one point, that no matter how much I repent, I've sinned so much, Allah can never forgive me. I've gone too much ahead in my sinful life to actually turn back. You have never gone far enough. You have never gone far enough. You know of the hadith of the person who killed 100 people and Allah even forgave him. So I'm sure you haven't killed 100 people,
Very
guys.
eloquent of you. Thank you for this. Do we have another question here? Yes.
My name is Noman Qureshi, and I would really appreciate if you answer my question in Urdu. मेरा सवाल ये है कि हम दीन के बारे में बात तो कर रहे हैं कि दीन क्यों ज़रूरी है. मुझे लगता है कि मेरी उम्र के जितने भी हम लोग हैं, हम लोगों को ग्रुप्स में फ़िरकाइज़म में बांटा गया है और हम लोग इजमाए उम्मत की बात क्यों नहीं करते. Why we don't talk about the army of Mahdi, that we all, हम सबको ही उनकी आर्मी बनना है और हम सब ही वो लोग हैं जो मतलब नबी पाक सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम की उम्मत हैं. और मुझे लगता है कि हम ग्रुप्स में ज़्यादा बटे हुए हैं और मतलब ज़्यादातर लोग बात करते हैं अपने स्पेसिफिक फ़िरके की.
Very important question, and I would want Brother Hijab to also sort of address this. Brother is asking that we as Muslims, we are victims of sectarianism, and we are not talking about ummah as a whole. How can we behave and start behaving ummah as a whole instead of rejecting these notions of sects? Sir?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that, and I've repeated this answer a few times, and I know Raja's heard it, but there's a difference between unity and uniformity, right? So unity is where you try and get people to rally under one issue, whereas uniformity is when you try and get everyone to believe in the same thing. We're not aiming for uniformity because we understand that there's going to be differences of opinion, and there has to be a mechanism of dealing with that. In fiqh, in jurisprudence, there is a principle at play, which most of the scholars have mentioned classically, which is la inkar fi masail al-khilaf, which means that there is no blame in the issues of difference of opinion. And in fact, Ibn Taymiyyah himself wrote a book called Raf' al-Malam, literally removing the blame from the ones who, from the mujtahids, effectively from the ulama, in the difference of opinion that they have. So we need to be able to live and let live. That doesn't mean, of course, in all contexts. Now, for example, you might have a particular understanding of Islam. You might be a staunch Ahl Hadith, a Salafist, and when you get your daughter married, you might not want her to be married to, Sufi, or vice versa, and that will always exist. However, for example, on the Palestine issue, everyone's coming together. Sufi, Salafi, Deobandi, the Brelvi, this one, that one, everyone, because they all have the same goal. And so I would summarize how to bring people together in two pieces of advice, and that's to summarize it. Number one is to produce one benefit or one goal that both parties can benefit from, so that we have a joint, it's a win-win situation. And number two is to focus on a joint enemy, a common enemy. Like, for example, in the case of India, Pakistan. If you're Barelvi, or if you're this one, Deobandi, Ahl Hadith, all of them have the same opinion when it comes to Modi. So Modi helps us in one way to come together. And that's how Ibn al-Qayyim, he mentioned the same thing. He mentioned that sometimes the devil can be good for you. Because Modi, the devil, or whoever it may be, it can be good for you because then it forces all the good people to come together and to fight against it. The struggling happens. Same thing with Palestine. And so on and so forth. So the point is the two pieces of advice I would give, actually three. Number one is to recognize the difference between unity and uniformity, and to opt for a kind of unity, not a uniformity, and to have mechanisms where we appreciate the principle of live and let live, and that there's no blame on difference of opinion. And number two is to focus on common goals and objectives and benefits. And number three is to focus on common enemies.
मैं अब इनकी बात का तर्जुमा भी क्विकली करना चाहूँगा. बहुत अहम बात उन्होंने फरमाई है. वो कह रहे हैं कि हमारे जो फ़िक़्ह का दर्जा है, जूरिस्प्रूडेंस का दर्जा है, जूरिस्प्रूडेंस के दर्जे के ऊपर इख्तलाफ अगर फ़ुक़हा के दरमियान है, मुज्तहिदीन के दरमियान है, तो वो जायज़ है. अगर कोई हनफ़ी है, कोई शाफ़ई है, कोई हम्बली है, कोई मालिकी है, तो ये सारी रवायात इस्लाम की रवायात हैं. आप किसी को भी चूज़ कर लें, आप कर सकते हैं. तो जब आप मुसलमान हैं तो इसमें यूनिफॉर्मिटी की बात नहीं है कि आपने बिल्कुल एक एस्पेक्ट को सोचना है. कि हमारे जो फ़ुक़हा थे और इन फ़ुक़हा से जुड़ी हुई जितनी रवायात थीं, ये ऑफ कोर्स हमारे इल्मी वर्से का एक दरख्शां बाब है. इसके अलावा जो वो फरमा रहे हैं कि हमारे कुछ कॉमन गोल्स हैं और कुछ कॉमन एनिमीज़ हैं. कॉमन गोल्स के लिए हमें हनफी, शाफ़ई, जाफरी नहीं होना, बल्कि कॉमन गोल्स पे हमने इकट्ठे होना है. और जो कॉमन एनिमी है, जो हमारा दुश्मन है, उसके ख़िलाफ़ भी हमने इकट्ठे होना है. तो एक बहुत ही खूबसूरत बात है. मेरा ख़्याल है हमारे उलमा, हमारे सब कॉन्टिनेंट के उलमा अगर इस पे आ जाएं कि फ़िक़्ह के दर्जे में इख्तलाफ को बर्दाश्त किया करें और कॉमन ऑब्जेक्टिव्स के ऊपर इकट्ठे हुआ करें, तो मेरा ख़्याल है कि पाकिस्तानी और सब कॉन्टिनेंट के मुसलमानों के लिए बहुत ही ज़बरदस्त बात है, जो कि ब्रदर हिजाब ने बताई है. थैंक यू सर. मैं एक और सवाल लेना चाहूँगा. जी.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम, माय नेम इज़ अब्दुल बासित और मेरा स्पेशली सवाल राजा ज़िया साहब से है. वो ये कि सर हम जैसे यूथ है ना, नए नए जो हमें दीन पे आना चाह रहे हैं, तो हमें बहुत सारी चीज़ें ना ऐसे लगती हैं कि जो हम दीन के ख़िलाफ़ हो रही थी पहले ना, हमें ये रियलाइज़ होना शुरू हो जाता है. तो जब हम घर में, मतलब मैं इंडिविजुअल, मतलब अपनी बात कर लूँ या हर कोई बात कर ले, कि हम जब अपने घरों में सबको कहना शुरू कर देते हैं कि ये नहीं करो, ये नहीं करो, तो वो वहाँ से हमें काफ़ी ना हिट फेस करनी पड़ती है. तो आप काइंडली इस तरीके से क्या कह सकते हैं कि हमें किस तरह से इन चीज़ों को हैंडल करना चाहिए और किस तरह से हमें मतलब एक्सट्रीमिस्ट भी नहीं होना चाहिए. तो काइंडली जज़ाक खैर.
सो इसमें मैं ये कहूँगा कि देखें, मैं आपकी बात से रिलेट कर सकता हूँ कि मैं खुद भी जब दीन की तरफ आया था ना नया नया, तो मेरी ख्वाहिश और तमन्ना ये थी कि मैं एक बात करूँ और सारे मान लें, क्योंकि मैं अल्लाह रसूल की बात कर रहा हूँ ना. अच्छा हुआ ये कि मैंने क्या किया, पढ़ना शुरू किया दीन, और मैंने अपने घर में दर्स रख लिया. किसके लिए? अपने फैमिली मेम्बर्स के लिए. अच्छा, मैंने उन सारों को, क्योंकि मेरी फैमिली हमारी आम इस्तिलाह में नॉन प्रैक्टिसिंग कहते हैं, उस तरह से नॉन प्रैक्टिसिंग थे, तो उनको मैंने लेक्चर दिया, खाना भी रखवाया हुआ था. आई ट्राई टू फॉलो द सुन्नह ऑफ द प्रॉफिट सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम कि खाने पे बुलाओ सारों को. खाने पे तो सारे आ जाते हैं. जब खाने पे आएंगे तो वो बाय वन गेट वन फ्री ये होगा कि खाने पे आएंगे, साथ में कहूँगा बाय द वे आधे घंटे का दर्स भी है. तो वो दर्स में उनको मैंने कुछ मजबूरन कुछ अपनी मर्जी से बिठा लिया, और उसमें मैंने उनको कुछ बड़ी मेन बातें बता दी कि जी ऐसे नहीं होगा, ऐसे नहीं होगा, ऐसे नहीं होगा, हमारे ख़ानदान में ये वाले प्रॉब्लम्स है सारे, ये चीज़ें हम गलत करते हैं. अच्छा, एक हफ़्ता गुजरा, मैं बड़ा परेशान हुआ कि ये अभी तक अमल क्यों नहीं कर रहे, और जल्दी ये होती है कि यार मैंने बता भी दिया और फिर भी नहीं सुन रहे. अच्छा, फिर क्या हुआ, अगले लेक्चर में दोबारा मैंने कहीं इनको घेर घूर के बुला लिया, तो मेरी वाइफ ने मुझे कहा कि आप ना वैसे आम तौर पे बड़े जॉली हैं और बड़े खुश रहते हैं, लेकिन लेक्चर देते हुए आप जो है ना गुस्से हो जाते हैं, क्या वजह है? मैंने कहा गुस्से वाली बात है, ये सुनते ही नहीं है मेरी बात. यार क्या मसला क्या है सारों को, यार मैंने 2 दफ़ा बताया, बात ही समझ नहीं आ रही इनको, ये तो लगता है ये जो लातों के भूत ऐसे समझे. तो आई न्यू माई एंगर वॉज कम्प्लीटली मिसप्लेस्ड, एंड आई न्यू कि मैं बहुत जल्दी कर रहा हूँ. तो प्रॉफिट सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम नेवर डिड दिस. यानी इमेजिन करें उन्होंने कैसे किया था कि बस एक बंदे के पीछे पड़ गए कि भाई तुम इस्लाम करके छोड़ोगे. देखें हमारे ऊपर है, हमने, इकबाल ने क्या कहा था, अगरचे बुत हैं जमात की आस्तीनों में, मुझे है हुक्म अज़ां ला इलाहा इल्लल्लाह. मैंने अजान देनी है, मैंने डंडा लेके पीछे नहीं पड़ जाना. हाँ, आपके जो अपने बच्चे हैं उनको थोड़ा सा आप डिसिप्लिन कर सकते हैं, जारी बात है, उनको कहा गया 7 साल की उम्र में नमाज पे लगाएं, 10 साल की उम्र में सख्ती की जा सकती है, लेकिन बाकी सारे तो आपके बच्चे नहीं है ना, वो तो लोग हैं, आप उनको प्यार मोहब्बत के साथ करें. बल्कि द प्रॉफिट सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम ही सेड कि यू नो लव फॉर योर ब्रदर व्हाट यू लव फॉर योरसेल्फ. मुझे बताएं, आप अगर दीन पे ना होते कैसे पसंद करते आपको दीन पे लाया जाता? यही पसंद करते ना कि प्यार मोहब्बत से बात हो, आराम से मुझे जी करके बात करें. तो फिर ये कैसे हो गया कि जब हम बात करने की बारी आती है तो सख्ती कर लेते हैं? सो उसमें हिकमत भी है, उसमें आपने स्ट्रैटेजाइज भी करना है, आपने डिफरेंट चीज़ें करनी है. मैं आपको एक मज़े की बात बताता हूँ. मेरे वालिद साहब ना मेरे मस्जिद जाने पे बड़े परेशान थे, और मैं समझ सकता हूँ क्योंकि मैं एक ऐसा लड़का जो बैचलर्स मास्टर्स बाहर से करके वो उनके आंखों का तारा वापस आके मौलवी हो गया, तो उनको लगा कि भाई ये तो गया, ये तो मस्जिद जाता है हर 2 मिनट के बाद फिर मस्जिद जा रहा होता है नमाज पढ़ने के लिए, तो पता नहीं कोई बम धमाके से ना उड़ जाए. تو ان کو ڈر تھا, اینڈ آئی کین سی کہ ان کے دماغ میں کچھ پری کنسیوڈ آئیڈیاز تھے کہ جو بندہ مسجد جاتا ہے اس کے ساتھ کیا ہوتا ہے. البتہ پھر یہ ہوا کہ میں نے کچھ آہستہ آہستہ باتیں شروع کی. اب میرے گھر میں وہی بات ہے کہ گھر کی مرغی دال برابر, میں جو بھی کہوں گا ابو نے ماننی نہیں ہے بات, کیونکہ وہ کہیں گے تم تو میرے بچے ہو, جمعہ 8 دن تم مجھے سکھاؤ گے اسلام کیا ہوتا ہے. تو میں نے کیا کیا, میں نے بڑی چالاکی کے ساتھ جس ٹاپک پہ بھی ابو کے ساتھ بات ہوتی تھی نا, جس پہ مجھے لگتا تھا کہ معاملہ پھنس رہا ہے اور میں بحث نہیں کرنا چاہتا, میں وہ فتاوا ڈاؤن لوڈ کر کے پرنٹ نکال کے اخبار میں ڈال کے ابو کو دے دیتا تھا. روز صبح تو ہمارے گھر میں دا نیوز آتا تھا, ٹھیک ہے, تو روز صبح میں فجر کی نماز کے ٹائم جب واپس آ رہا تھا نا, اسی کے آس پاس وہ اخبار والا آتا تھا, میں اخبار ابو کے ہاتھ چڑھنے سے پہلے ہی اسے لیتا, اس میں 2-4 پرنٹ آؤٹس ڈال دیتا, کوئی اسلامک ٹاپک کے اوپر نا کوئی ڈسکشن ہو رہی ہے. اچھا ابو نے مجھے ہفتہ گزر گیا یہ چل رہا ہے, ابو کہتے ہیں یار یہ دا نیوز والوں کو کیا ہوا ہے, یہ قرآن و حدیث کے اوپر بیس ہوئے آرٹیکلس کیوں چھاپ رہے ہیں ساتھ ساتھ, کیونکہ وہ لگتا ہے کوئی فلائر انسرٹ ہوا ہے. بٹ یہ بھی کرنا پڑا, اور بھی بڑی ٹیکنیکس اپلائی کی. تو بی کریٹو, لرن ٹو say one thing in different ways. اگر ایک طرح سے بات سمجھ میں نہیں آ رہی, کوئی اور طریقہ اپنا لیں. ضروری نہیں ہے کہ ہر بندہ لیکچر سن کے ہی ٹھیک ہو. کبھی کبھار ہمارا ان کے ساتھ ریلیشن شپ, پیار محبت, یہ بہت بڑا امپیکٹ کریٹ کرتی ہے. اینڈ ون تھنگ آئی ول فائنلی سے, وہ یہ ہے کہ جب بھی کسی سے آپ نے دین کی بات کرنی ہو نا, اپنے آپ کو پہلے سے یہ سوچا کریں ایز اف یہ میری ان سے آخری ملاقات ہے. پھر دیکھیں آپ کی بات کرنے کا طریقہ کیا ہوگا. امیجن کریں کہ اگر آپ کا بھائی ہے, لیٹ سپوز چھوٹا بھائی ہے, اس کو آپ کہتے ہو نماز پڑھو نماز پڑھو نماز, وہ نہیں نماز پڑھتا, گولی کراتا ہے, بھاگ جاتا ہے, لیفٹ رائٹ ہو جاتا ہے. اب امیجن کریں, اللہ آپ کو لمبی عمر دے, اللہ آپ کو صحت دے, لیکن امیجن کریں کہ اگر آپ وینٹیلیٹر پہ اور ڈاکٹر آپ کے پاس آتا ہے اور کہتا ہے کہ یار آپ کا یہ وینٹیلیٹر اتارنا پڑے گا اور آپ کے پاس آدھا گھنٹہ رہ گیا, آئی ایم سوری یار, ہم نے بہت کوشش کی آپ کو بچانے کی لیکن کچھ سمجھ میں نہیں آ رہا اور دیر از نتھنگ وی کین ڈو, آئی ایم سوری, آپ کے پاس آدھا گھنٹہ رہ گیا. اب آپ کو پتہ ہے میں مرنے لگا ہوں, آپ نے کہا بھائی آپ کا باہر ویٹ کر رہا ہے, آپ کہتے ہیں بھائی کو بلاؤ ذرا, بھائی اندر آتا ہے. اب آپ بھائی کو اپنے ساتھ بٹھاتے ہو, آپ اس کا ہاتھ پکڑتے ہو, آپ کہتے ہو میرے بھائی میری بات سنو, میں تو دنیا سے جا رہا ہوں بٹ میرے بھائی میں تجھ سے بہت پیار کرتا ہوں, شاید میں نے تجھے ڈانٹا ہو, میرے سے غلطیاں ہوں گی, بٹ برو آئی لو یو, پر لسن برو, میں تجھے دل سے کہہ رہا ہوں اگر تو مجھ سے ذرائی برابر بھی پیار کرتا ہے, تجھے میرا کوئی بھی لحاظ ہے, یار میرے پیارے بھائی نماز نہ چھوڑیں یار, نماز نہ چھوڑیں. اب مجھے بتائیں آپ کے جانے کے بعد وہ نماز چھوڑے گا؟ کیا خیال ہے؟ تو کیسے ہوا کہ ابھی وہ نماز پڑھ لیتا اور پہلے آپ نے کہا چل دفعہ ہو جا, نماز پڑھ, نماز ہی پڑھ رہا تھا. مسئلہ یہ ہے کہ شاید کبھی ہمارے بتانے کے طریقے میں فرق ہوتا ہے. تو کیپ چینجنگ یور ویز اینڈ آلویز بی سنسیئر. جو دل سے بات ہوتی ہے نا وہ اثر کرتی ہے, دل سے بات کیا کریں, انشاءاللہ اللہ تعالیٰ آپ کے اس کام میں آسانی کرے گا. جزاک اللہ.
اچھا, یہ بردر حجاب ریکویسٹ کر رہے تھے کہ کوئی ہماری فیمیل اسٹوڈنٹ بھی سوال کریں, تو اگر کوئی فیمیل اسٹوڈنٹس کو ایک دو کو انکلوڈ کر کے پھر ہم آپ کے پاس آتے ہیں. جی یہ پیچھے جی پلیز. So he especially asked me that we should have a female voice. Yeah, diverse. ان کو ذرا مائکروفون دے دیں.
السلام علیکم. Sir, actually it was dream for me to meet you guys. And last night me and my friend we were talking about we'll attend your sessions. And there was your post on story and we get excited and came here. So I have a question that I have a dream to go to UK or Australia for further studies. And while living in Lahore, it is very difficult for me to stick to my religion. Like when we saw someone doing which is prohibited in Islam or which is not liked in Islam. So I personally, if I talk about myself, I get attracted to it. So if we go to foreign countries where Islam is not practiced the way it is in Pakistan, how we get stick to our religion or get stick to our beliefs in that society?
Brother
like for
Hijab.
example, yes. Like
Brother
for
Hijab,
example,
I would like you to respond.
If we saw someone doing vlogging, for example, and they have the easy income. Vlogging that is not good in Islam or prohibited in Islam. So I get attracted to this thing that if I do these things, I get an easy income. Why I'm doing studying and doing all these things? So how do we stick to our religion or our beliefs while living there or living here?
So would you like to answer?
تھینک یو. ویسے فاصل میں ڈر گیا ہوں
want
لوگوں
you
کو
to say a few
کیونکہ
words.
میں نے تو بہت کی ہوئی ہے دنیا بھر میں. بہرحال دیکھتے ہیں کہ کیا سب جواب دیتے ہیں. پلیز.
Yes, please go on.
Sure. Look, I mean, to be honest with you, like in the West, it's not as, I mean, there's Muslim communities in the West. Let's just be honest about that. There's Muslim communities. And from my experience in the West, look, there are 44 countries in Europe, yeah? And then you have America, and you have Canada. Effectively, the West is, we're talking about Western Europe, and we are talking about Central Europe and Canada and America. That's what we're talking about for the most part. In my estimation, and this is my own list, it's completely subjective, opinionated. I do believe that the United Kingdom is probably the best place, if you had to go somewhere, to go. If you had to go, like in terms of the Muslim community, especially as a Pakistani, like you're going to find a lot of Pakistanis in London and Newham and like Essex and Whitechapel. Also Bengalis there actually, but definitely up north and Birmingham and Bradford is basically Pakistan now, but Bradford. I mean, 40% of the population is Muslim in Bradford, 40% by census data. And most of them are Pakistanis or from Pakistani descent. So it's not as if we don't have a community in England. I mean, there's certainly, you won't find that almost anywhere else, the institutions, the strength in Europe. And I don't think you're going to find that in America to that level. Although in Texas and those areas, you do have strong communities. If you had to go, I would suggest you get married before you leave. Because just being in that kind of environment where you're like, you know, intermixed and stuff like that. And I don't actually even believe, I mean, there's a difference of opinion among the scholars. I'll be open and honest with you. Can a woman even travel without a mahram? That's a question. Now, I'm not saying yes or no. Who am I to say anything? But there's a difference of opinion among the scholars of Islam. And the majority say, no, she can't. And so, yeah, you can get your own fatwa, you can do your own thing. I'm not involved in that. But being married will give you an extra layer of protection. And if you both go there to England, like my mom and dad went into England, right? And they were from Egypt, but they both went together. They got married in your age, and then they just went to England. First they went to Bahrain, and then they went to England. And it worked out. I mean, look, I'm not going to lie to you. There's advantages of it. There's economic advantages. There's even communal advantages. But there are disadvantages of it. You know, and I would say to you, you really have to see, because your life could be quite difficult here in Pakistan. In a certain, you guys can afford to come to a university like this, which means that you are of a certain socioeconomic background, which means within your friendship group, you might have a lot of very hardcore liberal people or secularists who maybe make you feel as if you are alien. And I felt like that's the case with a lot of religious people at the top of the socioeconomic bracket. They feel a little bit out of place. In the Western world, you don't get that as much. You don't have the same dynamic. So there are advantages and disadvantages, but the final decision will go back to you. Obviously, frankly, being in a Muslim country has so many advantages as well. You don't see it, I see it. Like, for example, hearing the adhan, for me, it's an extremely refreshing thing. You know, it makes me emotional, actually. And then in England, you don't have anything like that. The weather is horrible there. The weather is much better in Pakistan than it is in England. I know it's hot here, sticky, humid, and the pollution is outrageous in Lahore. I have to be honest, I've never seen pollution like that anywhere.
But you're still more satisfied, right?
Qualitatively, Karachi is better. Like in terms of pollution, is Lahore. I think it's because of the sea or something. But the stuff that you do have, you have a community. You don't feel like an alien. You can walk around. You won't be disrespected by the public. You know, you got the adhan. You have a rock solid community of Muslim people around you. There's a lot of things to do in Pakistan. It's a vast country surrounded by, I don't know, like how many other countries you could decide to go to. I don't know, Afghanistan, or, you know, or you talk about China. You can go to China, you've got a border with them. You can go to lots of countries, and it's in a beautiful place. And there's mountains, and there's the Kashmir, and there's this, and there's that. There's a lot of advantage. You won't see it until you leave. A lot of Pakistanis that have gone to the West, they actually want to come back. And I've just spoken to in this trip many people that have gone from the West back to Pakistan. And Raja's one of them. He's been in the West, he's been in Pakistan. What do you think, Raj? I wanted to ask you, what's your view? These are just my musings and opinions, but what's your opinion?
Yeah, so if I was to share my own personal opinion, I would say it's very similar. I mean, really, if youngsters come to us all the time asking, should I go, should I not go? So one of the advice you gave the sister was that she should get married. I tell this to the brothers as well. I said, if you're going to the West, please get married, because I've been there, done that. It's very difficult for you to be alone like this, because there's a lot of fitnas, there's a lot of challenges for you there. Secondly, I also tell them that it depends where you're going, because if you tell me I'm going to Las Vegas and I'm going to settle there for 5 years, I would say, please don't do that, because they call it Sin City for a reason. Okay, and you're going to put and so likewise, there are other parts of the world as well where people might not be so hospitable with Muslims, or for people wearing hijab and so on. So, but then there are other places which are gold mines for Muslims. For example, like Dallas, Texas, there's a huge Muslim population there. There are places in Australia where there's a very strong Muslim community, very good Islamic work happening, very good universities that have very good MSAs or Islamic societies working there. So it really depends where you want to go. It's not like one size fits all, because the world is a very vast place and each country presents its own challenges. So we don't want to be out of the frying pan into the fire. So do your homework first, find out where you're going, what's the plan, how long do you plan to come back? All of these are very important questions. So once you have those figured out, then you can inshallah decide whether this is better for you or that. But as Brother Hijab said, being in a Muslim country, wherever it might be, has its own advantages, that you are not in any danger that at some point the government might change some laws which might be bad for you from that perspective. Like, for example, some of the people are struggling with, LGBT curriculums and, forcing children to adhere to certain policies which the parents might not agree with. So do your homework first and then decide, inshallah, and take advice from, people who are elder than you, or for example, people who are more religiously inclined, who are actually living there, who can give you a better perspective, inshallah, of what to do.
Yes. Would you like to ask? Yes, please.
अस्सलाम वालेकुम।
Then I'll come to you.
सर, मैं बचपन से ये सुनती आई हूँ, मेरी दादी मुझे हमेशा कहती थी कि अल्लाह ऊपर वाला नहीं, अल्लाह दिल में रहता है, अल्लाह अंदर वाला है और तुम्हें उस तक खुद जाना है। लेकिन मुझे आज तक उन्हें ये नहीं बताया कैसे जाना है। तो मेरा सवाल ये है, कैसे जाना है?
ओके, तो इसको मैं यूँ कहूँगा कि अल्लाह ताला, यस, अल्लाह ताला तो इज़ द क्रिएटर ऑफ द हेवंस एंड द अर्थ। अल्लाह ताला ज़मीन व आसमान का खालिक है एंड एवरीथिंग इन बिटवीन। और अल्लाह ताला को जानने के लिए ना, अभी जिस तरह ब्रदर मोहम्मद हिजाब ने कुछ, आई थिंक मेरे आने से बिल्कुल पहले वो कुछ चीज़ें डिस्कस कर रहे थे। देखें, एक तो जो है ना, वो हमारे अंदर फितरतन अल्लाह ताला की मारिफत मौजूद है। जैसा कि जब आप देखते हो कि और ये मैं आपको बताऊँ, एक रिसर्चर है ऑक्सफोर्ड यूनिवर्सिटी की, ओलिवेरा पेट्रोविच, उनकी इस पर पूरी रिसर्च है कि children from even like Shinto religions like Japan and things like that, उनको भी जब टेस्ट किया गया और ये कहा गया कि फॉर एग्जांपल ये चीज़ें कुछ मैन मेड हैं, फॉर एग्जांपल ये बॉटल किसने बनाई है, उन्होंने कहा इंसान ने, ये ग्लासेस किसने बनाई है, इंसान ने, ये मोबाइल फ़ोन किसने बनाया, इंसान ने, फिर उन्होंने कहा ये ट्री किसने बनाया है, ये माउंटेन्स किसने बनाया है, ये आसमान किसने बनाया है। नाउ दीज थिंग्स के लिए, अच्छा ये जो है ना, ये शिंटो रिलीजन में वो कोई कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ गॉड नहीं है उनके यहाँ, तो या एटलीस्ट गॉड एज अ क्रिएटर ऑफ एवरीथिंग नहीं है। तो उन बच्चों ने, सब ने, उनको जो ऑप्शंस दिए गए थे वो ये था कि मैन मेड इट, विच इज़ ऑब्वियसली द रॉन्ग आंसर। एक और आंसर ये था कि दे मेड, खुद ब खुद हो गए थ्रू सम, मतलब ऑटोमेटिकली कुछ हो गया होगा। या तीसरा था कि गॉड मेड इट। तो उन सब ने गॉड का ऑप्शन चूज़ किया। ये सारे छोटे बच्चे हैं, 2-2 साल के, इनको कोई इनकी ब्रेन वॉशिंग नहीं हुई भी, कोई इनको, यानी पहली जमात के, तीसरी जमात के और 5वीं जमात के बच्चे थे। तो इन सब का जवाब ये था कि गॉड मेड इट। एंड ये फितरतन एक बात पता है, कोई तो है जो निज़ाम हस्ती चला रहा है। और जब आप दुआ मांगते हो तो आपको फीलिंग आती है, देयर इज अ लॉट ऑफ इट व्हिच इज एम्पिरिकल एंड साइंटिफिक एंड रैशनल एंड लॉजिकल एंड साइंटिफिक आर्गुमेंट फॉर द प्रूफ, वो चीज़ें भी हैं। लेकिन मैं समझता हूँ डीप डाउन इनसाइड जो बहुत स्ट्रॉन्ग आर्गुमेंट है ना, वो फितरा आर्गुमेंट है। और अल्लाह ताला कुरान में सूरह इसरा में इसकी मिसाल देते हैं, और मैं उसी को इंशाल्लाह आपके सामने पेश करूंगा। वो ये कि अल्लाह ताला एक मिसाल देते हैं कि इमेजिन करें कि आप समुंदर में, यूर इन द सी, राइट, और एक बड़ा स्टॉर्मी सी है, और नीचे समुंदर के आपको नहीं पता डेप्थ कितनी, आपको पता है कुछ पार्ट्स ओशन के ऐसे हैं जहाँ पे पूरा माउंट एवरेस्ट भी आ सकता है, नीचे भी अंधेरा है, डेप्थ्स ऑफ डार्कनेस है। समुंदर अगर किसी ने देखा हो, सुबह के टाइम पे बड़ा प्यारा लगता है, इट्स वेरी हैप्पी। रात के टाइम में समुंदर कैसा लगता है? इट लुक्स स्केरी। کبھی دیکھیں نا ذرا جائیں سمندر کے بیچ میں، پتہ لگ جائے آپ کو رات کے ٹائم کیسا ہوتا ہے. تو اندھیرا، اور ہمیں یہ بھی نہیں پتا، آپ کو پتا ہے صرف 4% اوشنز ایکسپلورڈ ہیں، صرف 4%. باقی اللہ جانے کون سی مخلوق نیچے رہتی ہے، ہمیں نہیں پتا. تو نیچے بھی اندھیرا اور اوپر بھی کالے بادل آئے ہوئے ہیں، لیئرز آف ڈارکنس اوپر، لیئرز آف ڈارکنس نیچے. اور آپ کی جو کشتی ہے وہ ڈگمگا رہی ہے، اور آپ کو لگتا ہے آپ ابھی گئے کہ ابھی گئے. اللہ تعالیٰ فرماتے ہیں اس موقع پہ کس کو پکارتے ہو؟ اینڈ اندر سے آواز آتی ہے اللہ. اس ٹائم پہ کسی کا جو ہے نا خدا پیسہ ہوتا ہے، کوئی یہ نہیں کہتا میرے پیسے مجھے بچا لے. کسی کا خدا سائنس ہوتا ہے، وہ نہیں کہتا سائنس مجھے بچا لے. اس ٹائم پہ نا آپ کو اللہ یاد آتا ہے. اور اسی لیے ایک کہاوت ہے کہ دیر از نو ایتھیسٹ آن اے سنکنگ شپ. ڈوبتی کشتی پہ کوئی ایتھیسٹ نہیں ہوتا، کیونکہ سارے کہہ رہے ہوتے ہیں او مائی گاڈ، او مائی گاڈ، او مائی گاڈ. سب کو یاد آتا ہے. تو اس لیے یہ ایک اللہ تعالیٰ کی پہچان.
تھینک یو جی.
حیا ایمان سے ہے. ہم کیسے مطلب فیس جو ہے نا اٹریکشن ہے، سینٹر ہے اٹریکشن کا، ہم اس سے کیسے بچ سکتے ہیں اس ماحول میں؟
اوکے سو I'll do part of it. میں تھوڑا سا اردو میں بول کے میں پھر I'll actually pass it on.
اردو میں یہاں آنسر کیجیے.
اچھا اردو میں کرتے ہیں، ٹھیک ہے. اوکے سو I'll try to be brief انشاءاللہ. ایک تو یہ کہ دیکھیں مردوں کو بھی حکم ہے نظر نیچے کرنے کا، عورتوں کو بھی حکم ہے نظر نیچے کرنے کا. ہماری آئیڈیل سچویشن تو یہ ہے کہ سارے ماشاء اللہ حیا والے ہوں، پردے والے ہوں. لیکن میں آپ کو ایک تھوڑی سی چیز بتا دوں. مکہ کے اندر جب صحابہ موجود تھے نا اور نبی کریم صلی اللہ علیہ وسلم موجود تھے، آپ کو پتہ ہے کچھ لوگ اس ٹائم پہ کعبہ کا طواف برہنہ حالت میں کیا کرتے تھے. ہمیں لگتا ہے کہ صحابہ کا جو انوائرمنٹ ملا ہوا تھا نا وہ ماشاء اللہ تبارک اللہ تھا. آپ کو پتہ ہے وہاں پہ پروسٹیٹیوشن بھی ہوتی تھی، وہاں پہ عورت سیکنڈ ریٹ سٹیزن بھی تھی، وہاں پہ طوائفیں بھی ہوتی تھیں، وہ سب ہوتا تھا وہاں پہ مطلب ہر قسم کا جو وائس آپ سوشل سوچ سکتے ہو وہ اس زمانے میں تھا. یہ نہیں تھا کہ وہاں پہ بالکل ہی ماشاء اللہ تبارک اللہ، وہ بعد میں ہوا ہے ماشاء اللہ تبارک، وہ جب مدینہ گئے ہیں تو ہوا ہے. لیکن اس سے پہلے جو 13 سال مکہ میں گزارے وہاں پہ کیا چل رہا تھا؟ تو صحابہ بھی تو انسان ہے نا، وہ کیا کرتے تھے؟ نظریں جھکاتے تھے. تو ایک ہمارا پرنسپل یہ، جس طرح ابھی ہماری بہن نے سوال پوچھا تھا کہ بھائی امریکہ جاتے ہیں انگلینڈ، بھائی کبھی کبھار سچویشن ہوتی ہے، کوئی بزنس ہوتا ہے، کوئی ورک ہوتا ہے. اب آپ وہاں کیا جی فتنہ اتنا زیادہ کہ میں ساروں کو دیکھ رہا ہوں، نہیں کر سکتے نا. تو ایک ہے سیلف کنٹرول، سیلف ریسٹرینٹ، وہ تو ہم نے کرنا ہی کرنا ہے. دوسرا یہ کہ ہاں معاشرے میں تلقین کیسے کی جا سکتی ہے، جس طرح اسلام کی تعلیمات پھیلیں گی. سورہ نور لوگ پڑھیں گے، سورہ احزاب پڑھیں گے تو پتہ چلے گا اللہ تعالیٰ کیا چاہتا ہے آپ سے. یعنی اللہ کو تو ہم مان گئے، چلیں یہاں پہ آج بھی بات ہوئی، سب کو پتہ چل گیا جی اللہ اکبر، اللہ کو مان گئے. اب اللہ کی بھی تو ماننی ہے نا، اللہ کی بھی تو ماننی ہے. اللہ کو ماننا اور اللہ کی ماننا، یہ دونوں چیزیں ساتھ ساتھ ہیں. ایسا نہیں ہو سکتا کہ آپ اللہ کو مانتے ہو کہ اللہ خالق کائنات ہے، دنیا کا خالق و مالک ہے، ہر چیز پر قادر ہے، ان اللہ علی کل شیء قدیر، اور پھر آپ اللہ کی نہیں مانتے. آپ کو پتہ ہے کس کی نافرمانی کر رہے ہو آپ. سو دو چیزیں یہاں پہ سائڈ بائی سائڈ ہیں. ایک چیز یہ ہے ڈسپائٹ ہاؤ ایور بیڈ دا سچویشن از، جتنے بھی حالات خراب ہو جائیں آپ کنٹرول ہی کریں اپنے آپ کو. آپ نے وہی نظریں جھکانی ہے، فالتو بات نہیں، یہ وہ سارا ہم نے کرنا ہے، ٹھیک ہے، نو میٹر واٹ ہیپنس. اور دوسری طرف ہمیں معاشرے کے اندر پیغام پہنچانا ہے تاکہ لوگ جو ہیں آہستہ آہستہ حیا کی طرف آئیں اور ان کے اندر پردہ اور ساری چیزیں جو ہیں ان کو ایجوکیٹ کرنا ہے. اور یہ جو آپ کے ساتھ آج بیٹھے ہیں وہ اسی کی ایک کاوش ہے کہ لوگوں کو اللہ سے جوڑیں گے. یہ پہلا سٹیپ ہے. دوسرا سٹیپ یہ ہے کہ وہ قرآن پڑھیں گے. پہلا سٹیپ یہ اللہ سے جڑ جاؤ. تو آئی ہوپ دیٹ آنسرز دی کوسچن فار یو انشاءاللہ.
Assalamu alaikum, sir. Sir, I am from Ahmedabad. When you had a session in Comstats University, Ahmedabad, I had to ask you a question, but I didn't get the chance to. Finally, I got the chance. I've been switching my degrees from BS Chem, firstly ETA Medical, then BS Chemistry, and then so I've had this question since a long time. If the institution for the females is the institution of the home, then what is the point of getting degrees like IT and like there is a huge revolution in AI and accounting and CA and ACCA. Because the point is that after completing our degrees, we have to work in a corporate sector, and the hard work in the corporate offices is a lot different kind of hard work. And the hard work we do in our homes, like handling the psychology of your kids, and you understand what I'm saying, the psychological and biological hard work that we have to manage in our homes is a whole different kind of institution. Both the hard works are totally different domains. So don't you think that if we spend a very big portion of our life getting these degrees and then do not go for the corporate offices and do not work in that institution, then all of that hard work is wasted? So I've wasted so many of my years for choosing the right degree, and I'm still not satisfied with the degree I'm doing. I'm doing ACCA now. So what passion should be get for education, what degree should we choose? I wasted my years, so I want the knowledge that what degree should we choose for our daughters or younger sisters, who are, so they don't waste time choosing their degree.
Thank
What
you.
kind of education they educational framework should they acquire? So they
Very
be
important
more-
question. I would like Brother Hijab to address this, and then probably Raja Sahab could contribute.
It's actually a good question that relates to both men and women, because a lot of degrees in the UK, for example, when you partake in them or participate in them, they will not actually lead to, for example, a career path. That's the truth of the matter. There are like 4 or 5 degrees which are brilliant degrees anywhere you go. Things like engineering, medicine, law, because you need people to do these kinds of things. Things related to science, technology, potentially, yes. I would say for sure, if a woman wants, if she wants to be a doctor, we need women doctors, of course, because like how else are you going to have treatment of women unless you have women doctors? She has to be very passionate about this topic, in my opinion. What would make me make a decision about anything in life, personally, is 2 things: competence and passion. Competence, if I'm good at something, I'm very, very good at it, and then passion. If a woman is very, very competent and very, very passionate about medicine, for example, and she wants to do a medical degree, I think that she needs to really consider the fact that she might need to sacrifice some of her home life, or even being married for a period, in order to do this thing for at least some years. Because it might be the case that you might want to work as a doctor for 3 years, for 4 years, then get married. Or that you get married to another male doctor, and he's okay with you being in that position, or something like that. So that's a possibility. You have to be very, very passionate about the topic in question. In terms of
principle,
in terms of other subjects and stuff, like in principle, look, it depends.
In principle, do women have to stay back, stay home? That was also, an important consideration
the
that
question
the
of-
sister was sort of articulating.
The question of education, the hukum, I don't see.
If women were to be homemakers only, do they really need to go to universities, colleges, and to be able to do these kinds of degrees
It
in the very
depends on what
first
she wants
place?
to do at home. Like nowadays, homeschooling has become a massive thing. Like, for example, I used to work as a teacher in a secondary school some years back, 10 years ago or something, I don't know, like less than that. And, you have a class of 20 students. If you have your own children, you're teaching them. So you might want to do some education in order to teach your own children, if that's your intention and objectives. Look, anything rational in life has to follow objectives. If your objective is to teach your children or to have classes of where women are learning and teaching each other and halaqat and stuff like that, then it might go ahead and go to university and learn. If you're not
principal, girls can,
of course,
yeah.
There's no doubt about that. I mean, look, the hukum is the same for men and for women. If someone says, well, it's haram for a woman to go to university because they're going to be free mixing and it's against hayat, for example, if someone makes an argument, then I would say the same thing applies for the man. I mean, this hukum, particular hukum, it doesn't differentiate if it's about free mixing and ikhtilat, mas'alat al-ikhtilat. There is actually zero evidence in Sharia to show that it is for men and not for women, and women and not for men. So if a man wants to go to university, he has to have a good reason for it. If a woman wants to go to university, she has to have a good reason for it. She has to be passionate about the subject, and she must have something that she's going to do with it. It might be as trivial as the following. A woman might say to herself, in my social circles, if I don't have a degree, I'm going to be looked down upon. And I want to, for my own life satisfaction, to feel good about myself, I want to spend 3 years doing a history degree, just so that I can feel good about myself. And I don't see a problem with that. What's the problem with a woman studying history for 3 years? I don't see a problem with that. It's like a man studying history for 3 years. However, you could argue, well, you could spend that time studying how to be a homemaker. If you really want to study how to be a homemaker, then get married. Because the job itself will teach you. It's like studying how to swim. The best way to learn how to swim is to get into the water. So look, it's personal choices. There's no way anyone can tell you, oh, this is haram mutlaqan or halal mutlaqan or wajib mutlaqan or makruh mutlaqan. These kinds of things about going to university and studying for a man or for a woman, it really depends on your personality, your passions, what you want to do as a person, and it is a matter of personal choice.
Okay, I have a question for both of you. The detractors of religion, they say that religions tend to micromanage human beings. And there are so many issues, which a rational person can make a rational choice, but religions tend to have, and in a Muslim tradition, we tend to have those very micro debates, and then we have fatwas, so on and so forth, on those very little, small, tiny issues. So how would you react?
I consider this stuff honestly,
isn't it trivial then?
It is, yeah.
It
mean, it depends on what we're talking about. But for example, the placement of the hands when you prayer and stuff should we put it here or should we put it there? And these guys are refuting each other. And I'm going to have a 4-page. There's one particular mosque. It's a fringe group of Salafis called Madkhalis. I don't know if you've heard of them. But anyway, it's in England. And this guy, he went to a khutbah. So imagine this is a place where all the masses, they congregate. And the guy that was doing the khutbah was talking about the length of the trousers. Because there's a hadith that says you shouldn't have, long trousers which drag on the floor. Your thobe shouldn't drag on the floor.
Yeah.
So this guy, he was going in, and the whole khutbah was about that. And he said, and this, and you'll go to hell, and you're... And then at the end of the khutbah, you thought he had enough. He spent a whole khutbah doing it. The guy told me that he heard, and next week we're going to go for round 2 of the same topic. I was thinking to myself, clearly these guys, they don't have what you call fiqh al-awlawiyat, which is the fiqh of prioritization.
Absolutely.
So it's like, what do you prioritize first? What's the most important thing in your life? 1, 2, 3. It's as if now they've lost what you call, they've lost the trees, the forest. They're looking at a tree, but there's a big forest. You're looking at just one thing. It's a kind of fixation. And there's nothing in Islam which shows you that that's not how it should be. If you see these kinds of debates, just, water off a duck's back. It's trivial, like you say. We don't have time for this. We have people dying in Palestine. We have this one. We have the Muslims, 59 countries. We have all these ideologies. We have colonization happening, new age colonization. And we're talking about the length of that. And the length of the beard as well. It has to be, it has to be this one. It has to be two fists. And 1 fist, and no, there's difference of opinion about the length of the beard. Where there's difference of opinion, we will be lenient about the matter. That's what we have to be. And where there isn't difference of opinion, no, we will say, look, this is haram, We're not going to judge you too much, but this is haram. Please try and fix this behavior, and that's it. That's how it should be, I think.
One last question.
Assalamu alaikum.
Okay, please, go on. I'll come to you.
To ask Hijab something about free will and predestination. So I have a journey with this thing for past 5 years. I went from a non-practicing Muslim to an atheist, and then to a nihilist, and then took a step back to an agnostic, and then alhamdulillah I reverted to Islam. So since I have started believing in everything, everything now makes sense to me. But this one thing has still not made sense to me, and I keep struggling with it. So I just want to share my conclusion with you, so you can recommend me, is it true? Is it the right conclusion, or should I unlearn this and take another approach to get to this? So my conclusion to this is, I have heard so many scholars, 12, 13, and read some books about this topic. So first thing, just like you shared in your video, Qadariya, Jabariya, all that thing, 3 positions and their history. And then Quran comes and says, Imma shakiram wa imma kafura. It makes it really clear. But the conclusion, because I couldn't understand it, so I went to, this is something to be believed without understanding. Just like Allah has made our senses limited, we can't see angels, we can't see jinnat, and just like we can hear some frequencies scientifically proved, we can smell a few things that other creatures can. Just like this, our akal is also bound to some limits. This is one conclusion, and then comes the ayat la yuhituna bi shay'in min ilmihi illa bima sha. And then the time thing, that time doesn't exist for Allah, it exists for us, like mazi, hal and mustaqbal. And then how does the predestination, which we sometimes call pre-knowledge, and then the free will, how does both of these things exist simultaneously? We can't understand it, and it doesn't make sense. But Allah is able to do it. That's what makes Him Allah. And then, just like it says, Inna Allah ala kulli shayin qadir. And then again and again in Quran comes Quran invites us to think about the creature of Allah, like the sky and the heavens and everything. But it never invites us to think about the Zaat of Allah or Umur of Allah, like how Allah manages things and how He provides us. This is one of that. And is it wrong to think so much about this thing? People call it that it's an easy way out from Islam.
Yeah, I mean, it is wrong to think too much about the mechanisms of this thing, and there's hadith on that. Like the Prophet would get angry with people that would do that, actually with Qadr in particular, and the Salaf wouldn't do that. And there's a reason, because in terms of encompassing this thing with your knowledge, it's not humanly possible. However, someone could argue, let me be polemical with myself and say, well, you guys say, when the Christians say the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, and we don't know how they come together, you say, how can you say that? And you say the same thing about Qadr, and for example, that we have free will at the same time. Allah not only knows the future, He willed the future, He wrote the future, He done the future. How could it be Allah done all that with the future, and at the same time we have free will? You're telling me that it's something which is, you don't know the full capacities of and so on, but then when the Trinitarian comes, you say such and such. I say there's a distinct difference between the two. The Trinitarian is discussing who is God. The who-ness of God. On this issue, we're not talking about who is God. Effectively, we're talking about how does God do what He does. So the question shifts from who to how. Now, let me give you an example. If I say, how does God see? Now, we all affirm God sees, God hears. How does God see? Now, we know how He doesn't see. Like, for example, I've got an eyeball, and the eyeball goes to the brain, and the retina, and such thing happens. God doesn't see in that way. For example, we know that that's not how God sees, but we don't know how God does see. How does God hear? Now, how does God do qadr? We don't know how God does qadr. It follows the same sequence. We don't know because it relates to the mechanisms of one of the attributes of God, which is the irada of Allah, the will of God. How does God will? That's effectively what we're asking. We don't know how God wills. So to answer your question, how is it possible that a human being can have a will, and God can have a will, and God can know and this and that? The howness is unknown. It's the same as asking how does God see? There's been so many attempts to try and reconcile using analogy. I remember one person said to me, look, I've found out the way to do it. I said, how? He said, look, imagine you're jumping into a swimming pool. Okay? Like it's a big swimming pool, and I jump inside. I say, fine. And as you're jumping, someone's pushing you at the same time with exactly the same forces you need to go into the swimming pool. He said, this is how qadr and free will works. So for about 5 minutes, I thought this is very convincing. And then one sheikh came out, you know what he said? He said one thing, I'll never forget it. He said, but who's making him jump? Because you see, so the issue is with analogies is that there is no analogy that I have ever heard that fully covers how this works. There are partial analogies. And there's one the Prophet ﷺ actually gave himself. Not about qadr explicitly, but it's a very powerful analogy. He says that, and this is a hadith in Bukhari, which is that the similitude of the Quran to the people is like rain to the ground. Because when the rain comes from the ground, it hits the ground. Some parts of the ground, it produces plantation and vegetation and shrubbery. And other parts of the ground is dead. Likewise, the hearts of the believer. This is the Prophet ﷺ. It's a beautiful hadith. That when the Quran hits some of their hearts, some of it, like the brother was talking about, the fitrah, connects with the fitrah and it flourishes like a beautiful plant. And some of it doesn't, it's dead. This analogy, interestingly, I found something similar to it. I done, by the way, a small book you can find on the Sapiens Institute on Qadr. You can find it free of charge, it's there, and it gives you all the references. Yes? But there was a Stoic philosopher, his name was Chrysippus. His name was Chrysippus. He said, look, he said, the human being is like a rock. They react differently to pressure. So for example, if I go on top of a high hill, it's a high hill, and I have this bottle like this bottle, it has a flat surface. I put the flat bottle like that and I push the bottle on the top of the hill, what will happen? It will just fall like that. Nothing will happen. Yes? But if I get a ball and I push it with the same force, it will roll down. Okay? So he says the human being works in a similar way. You can have the same event take place, which is say the pushing, but it has two different effects. So on person A, because the nature is, let's say they're hard-hearted nature. The person's got evil nature. So you show him the Quran, you show him the miracles, you show him the signs, he rejects, he's arrogant. He, as the Prophet told us what arrogance is. The other person, as soon as he hears the truth, he accepts it. So there are many analogies that will give you a partial understanding, but there is no analogy that will give you a full understanding on the mechanisms of how it is that qadr and free will, they coexist. However, if we put religion to the side, completely to the side, fully, in secular philosophy, the same schools of thought which exist in religion exist among the atheists in secular philosophy. Isn't that interesting? What are these schools of thought? You have the determinists, you have the compatibilists, and you have the libertarian free will believers. These are three schools of thought. Three. As for the determinists, they say everything, and they have a very strong argument. They say everything can be explained if you knew the past. For example, right now I'm pushing this button like that. Okay? The cause of me pushing this bottle like that is me. It fell down. If we went into the future and all we saw was the bottle falling down, we would consider it to be a random event. But if we rewinded it a little bit and saw me pushing, then you know the cause of the event. So determinism says everything causes something else. Even what I think is being caused by some other thought, some other thing, and it keeps going back. So determinism is that we're effectively all puppets to the past. That's what determinism says. And so this is probably one of the most popular philosophical schools of thought, which is, even if you don't believe in God, they say that everything is determined. So what do they say is the thing that determines it? They call it the uninterrupted causal chain. We call it God. Compatibilists say, but how comes if I want to pick up this bottle and do this with it, I actually feel as if I'm picking up this bottle and doing that? How come? They say it's because it's first person. There's no way anyone can deny. There's no science experiment can deny the fact that I'm speaking to you right now and doing this. There's no science experiment. So they say free will is something which is the base of everything. If you don't have free will, you can't do morality, you can't even do rationality. You can't do anything without free will. So the other guys don't have a strong argument, I'll be honest. But so these two guys here, the compatibilists say free will exists and determinism exists. They say the same exact thing. There's a debate between Daniel Dennett and Sam Harris. They're two new atheists. And one of them is a compatibilist, which is closer to the madhab of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, which is effectively qadr is there and khiyar is there at the same time. And the other one is a Jabri, who's a determinist. The same madhabs which exist in the religion exist outside of the religion. I saw someone in Canada, he's also Pakistani, and it's online. He said, I left Islam. I said, why did you leave Islam? He said, because of the issue of qadr. I said, no problem, what did you become? He said, I became an atheist. I said, so what is your position of qadr now? Because the same madhabs that exist in Islam exist in atheism. So you've moved from one place where the same discussions are being had in one way and moved to another place where the same discussions are being had. So what to do? Go be a Christian. I can tell you the same madhabs exist in Christianity. Armenianism and Calvinism and Molinism, the same three madhabs. The point I'm making to you is, this is a question that humanity has struggled to deal with. But it's not a creedal disproving question. No one can claim, if you get this question wrong, it means Islam is false. Because if that's the case, all of the religions are false, even atheism is false, even this is false, everything is false. It doesn't, you just have to take a position on the matter. And the majority position in secularism and in Islam is a compatibilist position, by the way. That's the majority of scholars. Even John Locke believes in that. Even Thomas Hobbes, even the liberals, J.S. Mill believes in compatibilism. So it's the majority opinion anyway. So it's not something which is Islam specific even. That it's only Islam that forces you to believe in these things. And yes, the mechanism is unknown, and to summarize, I'll tell you that the similitude of us asking how does our will connect with God's will in a way that we can have free will, but Allah knows the future, He writes the future, He creates the future, etc. The howness of that is the same as me asking the question, how does God see, or how does God hear? We don't know how.
Thanks a lot, gentlemen, for being here. I have a little announcement here. All of you could record your comments and views on the media wall. I want to thank Raja Saab, I want to thank Brother Hijab for your very comprehensive, in-depth analysis on the issues that were discussed today. And I'm reminded of a sentence by Ali bin Usman Ajweri, who was a Sufi, and he also spoke about Qadr and Jabr. And Ali bin Usman Ajweri says, and I quote him in Urdu first, Hazrat Ali bin Usman Ajweri फरमाते हैं, कदर से नीचे और जबर से ऊपर एक लकीर है, मोमिन उस पे चलता है. There is a line between free will and compulsion, and that is the line a Muslim or a Mu'min has to sort of tread. And that line, and the discovery of that line is the first thing. May Allah make us walk the talk. Whatever was said, whatever we promulgated, may Allah bless our hearts. So with this, we come to the conclusion of this fantastic session, and I hope that this session will be aired through Alief Television. I'm grateful to the team of Alief Television. The CEO himself is here. I want to thank Institute of Art and Culture, Youth Club, Sapiens Institute. Thanks a lot, gentlemen.